Sometimes there must be something in life, but sometimes there must be something forced in life. This is a story of longevity. Keywords of the novel. No pop-ups in Tianjiji. Download the complete collection of Tianjiji TXT, and read the latest chapters of Tianjiji. Chapter 1. Preface to Descending the Mountain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Preface to Descending the Mountain. The world is relative. The Middle Earth continent faces the Great West across the ocean. The terrain in the east is relatively high, and the sky there seems to have risen as well. Clouds and mist rise from the sea and land, constantly drifting towards that place, eventually converging and never dispersing throughout the year. This is the cloud tomb. The tomb of all clouds in the world. In the deepest part of the cloud tomb, there is a solitary peak that leads straight into the void, without knowing where it leads. Legend has it that the world is composed of 5 continents, each with its own unique scenery. Only those powerful beings who enter the sacred realm can see all the scenery. For ordinary people, legends are just legends. They don't know where the other continents are, how to get there, or that the solitary peak in the cloud tomb is the gateway to other continents. Of course, no one has ever seen the scenery above the clouds. Here, the calm clouds spread like white threads in all directions, seemingly endless. Behind the mirror of the void above is an endless black abyss with countless stars inside. Suddenly, 2 stars lit up, getting brighter and brighter, originally approaching the mirror at high speed. Those 2 stars came to the front of the mirror to see clearly. It turned out to be 2 sacred white flames. A spider web-like crack appeared on the mirror that separated the real world from the night sky, and was instantly repaired. Those 2 sacred flames have appeared in a magical way in the real world on the mirror side, the faint air constantly fluctuating and deforming as it burns. It's not divine fire, it's just its eyes. The whole world was restless due to the massive arrival, with light constantly refracting and a mountain-like shadow appearing on the cloud surface. Space began to arch and deform, seeming to be squeezed apart. A golden dragon appears between the void and the clouds. The distant red sun was completely obscured by its massive body, and the world tens of thousands of kilometers above the clouds became dim as a result. The temperature around it dropped sharply, and frost crystals began to form in the clouds, reflecting countless rays of light and turning into strange sparkling crystal mirrors. The world changes color due to it, which is the majesty of top-level life. The golden dragon overlooks the world with indifferent eyes. It has seen the scenery on the clouds many times. The golden dragon flew towards the solitary peak in the sky, and as it approached, its terrifying and massive body sank deep into the clouds and disappeared. An endless amount of mist was shattered by a terrifying and massive body. The rocky cliffs between the isolated peaks are extremely steep, devoid of any plants or even moss. It is a dead silence, like a tomb. Flying towards the depths of the fog, after a long day and night, I didn't know how far I had flown, but I was still in the fog and didn't encounter anything else. I could only vaguely see moss appearing between the cliffs, and the clouds and mist were much thicker than the top. Perhaps due to self-compression, many crystals began to form in the clouds and mist, which were water droplets, and the air became moist. The golden dragon showed no interest in these changes and continued to fly downwards. The plants in the isolated peak are becoming more and more numerous, the clouds are getting wetter, and water droplets are falling on the cliffs, gradually turning into countless streams of water with the thickness of green leaves. Countless and delicate streams of water flow through the cliffs, falling into the mist. The golden dragon looked at the thousands of tiny streams between the solitary peaks, and its expression in the pupils became much more solemn. The 2 divine flames became even more eerie. This was the tomb of all clouds and the source of all water. Countless streams of water fall from the solitary peaks, and it only looks at one of them. The golden dragon flew silently in the mist, following the stream through countless days and nights, as if it would repeat endlessly. However, at some point, the mist in front of it dissipated. Before the clouds and mist, it was the ground. The lower edge of the cloud is very smooth, completely following the undulations of the ground, perfectly ensuring that there is a distance of 5 feet between the cloud and the surface, which is exactly a human height, seemingly designed by the Creator. A 5-foot space between the Earth's surface and clouds leads to a distant place, where there is faint light but no sun can be seen. On the surface, there are countless streams. The mist dissipated in front of the huge dragon head, revealing the ground and the small stream. The stream comes from the wet dew in the isolated peak, clear and calm, cold and crisp. There is a wooden basin floating in the stream, with several layers of burlap inside. On the burlap, there is a baby. The baby's face is slightly blue, with eyes closed, clearly not too long after birth. The mist on the stream bloomed like flowers, blooming countless petals. It was crowded, surging, scattered, and hissing. A golden dragon head, even larger than a palace, slowly emerged from the mist and came to the surface of the stream. The 5-foot distance between the stream and the mist is very narrow for it. The body of the golden dragon is hidden in the mist, and some of its head is also hidden in the mist, appearing increasingly majestic, mysterious, and terrifying. The golden dragon looked quietly at the stream. The wooden basin is still slightly undulating in the stream. In the small wooden basin, there is a newborn baby who has been abandoned, with closed eyes and a pale face. The mist gradually dissipated, and everything returned to tranquility. However, tranquility is only temporary. In the depths of the mist, even near the isolated peak, countless mournful and panicked screams and howls rang out almost at the same time. In what was originally thought to be a silent and lifeless world, there were so many birds and beasts hidden. The sound of flapping wings was everywhere in the fog, the sound of unicorns frantically crashing into giant trees for thousands of years, and even a very clear phoenix roar. An invisible flame formed by a divine thought spread from the riverbank towards the sky, and the wet grassland suddenly became extremely dry. Even the edges of the water plants in the stream curled up. There was still no emotion in the eyes of the golden dragon, noble, indifferent, ruling the world. Under the clouds and mist, all the beasts in the world are running away. It doesn't care, even the young phoenix doesn't care. It just stares at the small stream in front of it, at the wooden basin on the stream. The solitary peak has fallen hundreds of thousands of streams, and it only stares at this stream. After a gap of 30,000 years, it has returned to this world for the sake of this baby in the basin. How can it move its gaze? A very thin thread of light slowly falls down. The outer surface of the thread is golden, while the inner part is sacred and pure white, as if it can emit light on its own. The front end of the thread is extremely thin, and the back end gradually thickens, until it is like a child's arm. The surface is extremely smooth and perfect, especially the luster that permeates from deep, adding more beauty. The material of this ray of light is like gold and jade, giving the impression that it should be heavy, but in reality it is very light. It sways continuously with the gentle breeze on the stream, as if dancing, wanting to lightly touch the wooden basin, but then instantly retracts it. That is the dragon whisker of the golden dragon. At this moment, the divine fire in the eyes of the golden dragon had become less eternal and stable, and indifference had been replaced by contemplation, seeming to be hesitating about something. The front ends of the 2 dragon whiskers, like gentle fingers, lightly touched the edge of the wooden basin on the stream, as if caressing, but in reality, they did not actually make real contact. This golden dragon has gone through an extremely long period of time, possessing unimaginable wisdom. However, at this moment, the wooden basin seems to be a difficult problem that it cannot solve. Its emotions in its pupils have become increasingly complex, with longing, vigilance, hesitation, and finally turning into struggle, perhaps unintentional, perhaps intentional. The wind above the creek has slightly changed, and the dragon's whiskers that should have brushed against the edge of the wooden basin tremble gently. Finally, for the first time, it truly touched the wooden basin, even rubbing under the ears of the baby in the basin. It was this slight contact that caused an extremely drastic change. The two divine flames deep in the pupils of the golden dragon's eyes scattered with a loud roar, turning into countless stars. In that sea of stars, a cold and greedy desire was exposed naked. That desire is praise and emotion. It is a praise for life, it is moved by life. It is the most primitive desire of life. The golden dragon looked at the wooden basin on the stream, opened its mouth, and its breath poured out like shattered jade. The baby in the basin still closed their eyes and had no idea what would happen next. The stream is shrouded in shadows. The dragon's breath fell around the wooden basin. In the next moment, the wooden basin and the baby inside will become food for the golden dragon. At this moment, one hand fell on the edge of the wooden basin and pulled it towards the stream. That is a hand covered in scars, somewhat thin and small. Amidst the sound of splashing water, the stream burst and the hand grabbed the wooden basin, running desperately towards the riverbank. The owner of that hand is a 3 or 4-year-old little boy. The little boy pulled the wooden basin to the bank of the stream, hit it between the shore stones and his own body, then turned around, drew his sword from his waist, and looked at the terrifying, huge golden dragon head on the surface of the stream. This is a very strange little servant. He is blind in one eye and missing one ear. When he was running desperately in the stream earlier, he could see that his legs were also a bit limp. Looking at the empty sleeve, he only had one hand. No wonder he had to hide the wooden basin behind him in order to draw his sword. Looking at the huge dragon head on the stream, the little boy's face turned pale and his teeth chattered, not frozen by the icy water of the stream, but because of fear in his heart. This is the first time he has seen a real dragon. He didn't even know what a dragon was, all he knew was fear, but he didn't escape. Instead, he held the thin wooden sword and tightly blocked the basin behind him. The golden dragon looked at the little boy with an indifferent expression. Only the super strong who had also entered the sacred realm could see the anger and coldness in its deepest pupils. The little boy shouted something, his face pale and extremely afraid, but he didn't let go of the basin in his hand. The golden dragon became angry, its breath enveloping both sides of the stream, and death was imminent. The wooden sword in the hand of the little boy fell into the water, and he turned around to hold the wooden basin in his arms. The scales on the golden dragon's body rubbed against the mist, splashing countless sky fires, and the stream began to burn. At this moment, a middle-aged Taoist appeared by the creek. The middle-aged Taoist looked at the golden dragon on the stream with a peaceful expression. The sky fire on the stream suddenly extinguished. The golden dragon looked at the middle-aged Taoist and let out a dragon chant. The dragon chant is extremely long, as if it will never stop. It is an extremely complex syllable that sounds like the most complex music, and also like the sound of the most terrifying hurricane in nature, carrying unimaginable power. The middle-aged Taoist looked at the golden dragon and said a word. That is a monosyllabic word with an extremely strange and difficult to understand pronunciation, seemingly not like human language at all. The fragments seem to contain infinite information, full of ancient significance. The golden dragon understood, but it disagreed. So the mist on the stream surged violently. Dragon breath spewed everywhere, and the wet grass and trees by the stream instantly turned into a terrifying fire. The little boy turned his back to the stream, unaware of what had happened. He lowered his head in fear, closed his eyes, and only held the wooden basin tightly in his arms. After an unknown amount of time, the riverbank finally quieted down. The little boy mustered up his courage and looked back, only to see the clear water of the stream, and the fires on both sides of the stream had already extinguished. Only the charred trees and cracked stones were recounting the terror of the previous battle. A dragon roar could be heard from the depths of the clouds and mist. The howl was filled with pain, unwillingness, and regret, telling the entire world of the 5 continents how their previous hesitations had brought about painful regrets. The little Taoist was startled, holding a wooden basin with one hand and limping up the bank from the stream, walking towards the middle-aged Taoist and timidly looking into the deep clouds. The middle-aged Taoist reached out and extinguished the flames on his shoulders. The little boy remembered something and lifted the wooden basin with some difficulty. The middle-aged Taoist took the wooden basin and gently picked up the baby inside. His right fingertip, separated by a burlap, landed on the baby's body. The next moment, his eyebrows furrowed. "Your fate is really bad," he said with pity as he looked at the baby wrapped in linen. To the east of the East Land continent, there is a small town called Xining. There is a small stream outside the town, and there is a mountain by the stream. There is a temple in the mountain, but there are no monks in the temple. Only a middle-aged Taoist with 2 disciples is practicing enlightenment here. The mountain is an unnamed green mountain, and the temple is an abandoned Buddhist temple. There are 2 disciples, one with a Taoist name of more than 10, and the other with a name of Chen. Xining town is located within the territory of Zhou state. Since the Zhou dynasty established Taoism as the state religion 800 years ago, it has been revered since the Orthodox era. According to theory, the 3 masters and disciples should live a life of luxury and luxury. However, Xining town is too remote, and the dilapidated temple is even more remote. People are rarely seen in daily life, so they can only live a simple life. Taoists naturally need to cultivate themselves. In today's world, there are countless ways to practice, but the Taoist teachings taught by middle-aged Taoists are completely different from those of other sections. They do not pay attention to the cultivation and comprehension, do not care about the sitting of life stars, and do not care about the refinement of divine souls. They are simply written in one word. Recitation. Many people have been reciting Taoist classics since childhood, and Chen Changsheng is forced to stare at those yellowed old books as soon as he opens his eyes. The first thing he knows is the room full of Taoist classics. After learning to speak, he begins to learn to recognize characters, and then begins to recite the words from those Taoist classics. Reciting and learning from time to time, to the extent that one can memorize it fluently, this is the life of the 2 little servants in the dilapidated temple. Wake up in the morning, they are reciting. In the scorching sun, they are reciting. In the hoarse dusk, they are reciting. Spring is warm and flowers are blooming, summer thunder is shaking, autumn wind is howling, winter snow is cold and desolate. They are on the ridge, by the stream, under the tree, by the plum blossom, holding the Taoist scriptures and reading them non-stop, carrying them on their backs, unaware of the passage of time. In the dilapidated temple, there was a whole room filled with Taoist scriptures. When I was 7 years old, I had bored counting them, with a total of 3,000 volumes, 3,000 volumes of the Great Way, 1 volume or hundreds of words, or more than 1,000 words. The shortest divine scripture was only 314 words, while the longest longevity scripture was over 20,000 words, which was all they had to memorize. The 2 senior brothers kept reciting, only seeking to remember and not to understand deeply. They had long understood that the master would never answer any of their questions about the Taoist scripture, only saying, "Remember, you will naturally understand." For those playful enlightenment children in the world, this kind of life is really unimaginable. Fortunately, the Green Mountains are remote, with few people and no external objects lingering around, so they can concentrate. The 2 little servants have a unique temperament and do not find it boring. They carry it on day after day, unconsciously passing several years. One day, the sound of reading that had not stopped for years stopped. 2 children sat on the rocks, shoulder to shoulder, with a book resting on their knees. They glanced at each other and looked at each other, both looking somewhat bewildered. At this point, they had already memorized the last volume, but couldn't continue because they couldn't understand it. The text on this volume of Daodian was very unfamiliar. To be precise, it was strange. Those radical parts and strokes were clearly known, combined, but became completely strange things. How to read them? What does it mean? The 2 of them returned to the temple and found a middle-aged Taoist. The middle-aged Taoist said, "The great Tao is 3,000, and what you are reading is the last volume. This volume contains 1,601 characters, which is said to contain the ultimate meaning of the heavenly way. No one has ever fully understood its meaning, let alone you. Chen Changxing asked, Master, don't you understand either? The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and said, no one dares to say they really understand, and neither can I. Brother Shi glanced at each other and felt a bit regretful. Although he was still a child, he still managed to memorize the 3,000 Taoist treasures to this day, only one volume away from completing the competition. Naturally, he would not be happy. But after all, they are not ordinary children. They have been accompanying the Taoist scriptures since childhood, and their temperament is also somewhat indifferent. The two of them are ready to turn around and leave. At this moment, the middle-aged Taoist continued. But I can read. From that day on, middle-aged Taoists began teaching the pronunciation of the last volume of the Taoist scriptures, teaching pronunciation word for word. The pronunciation was particularly strange in simple monosyllabic sections, but they had to use a muscle in the throat and had special requirements for the vocal cords. In short, it was not a sound that normal humans could produce. Chen Changxing didn't understand at all, just like a little duck, obediently imitating the pronunciation taught by his master. However, the others occasionally remembered the word that his master had said to that terrifying creature many years ago by the creek. It took Yuan Chen Changxing a long time to finally master the pronunciation of the 1601 character, but they still couldn't understand its meaning. They couldn't get an answer when asking the middle-aged Taoist. By then, they had already spent a whole year on this last volume, and then they began to recite it as before, holding the last volume until they could memorize it. When they thought they had finally gotten rid of the life of reciting Taoist scriptures, the middle-aged Taoist asked them to start reading it a second time. Helpless children were forced to repeat it again, or because of repetition, this time reciting the Taoist scriptures made them feel much harder, even a bit unbearable. It was precisely at this moment that they began to wonder why Master had to read these Taoist scriptures together. Why not teach oneself to practice? It is written in the Taoist scriptures that Taoists should cultivate and pursue immortality. At that time, I was 10 years old, and Chen Changxing was 6.5 years old. It was also in the autumn of that year that a white crane broke through the clouds and brought greetings from distant friends and a silk book. The silk book wrote the 8 characters of my birthday, as well as a marriage letter and a token. A high-ranking official who had been saved by a middle-aged Taoist wanted to fulfill his promise back then. The middle-aged Taoist looked at the wedding letter with a smile and remained silent, then looked at the 2 disciples. The others waved their hands and pointed to their own eyes that couldn't see anything, smiling and refusing. Chen Changxing looked confused and didn't understand what this meant. He took the marriage letter in a confused manner, and from then on, he had a fiancée A.E. In the following years, during festivals, the white crane would break through the clouds and arrive, bringing greetings from the nobleman in Kyoto and some interesting small gifts to give to Chen Changxing. Chen Changxing gradually realized what an engagement meant. Every night, he looked at the quietly lying marriage letter in the drawer under the starlight. He had an indescribable feeling and thought of his fiancée A.E., who was about his age. He felt a peaceful joy, a little shy, and even more lost. A peaceful reading career, when Chen Changxing was 10 years old, had an accident. One night, after reciting 1601 words from the last volume of the Taoist scripture for the 72nd time, he suddenly felt his consciousness drifting away from his body and began to sway in the woods of the Green Mountains. He couldn't fall asleep and his body began to emit a strange fragrance. It's not the fragrance of flowers, leaves, or powder. Speaking lightly, it lingers in the night breeze for a long time. Speaking strongly, it drifts into the nose, but it is so ethereal, unlike the fragrance that can appear in the human world, elusive and extremely tempting. The first person to discover Chen Changxing's situation was Yu Ren. Smelling the strange fragrance, his expression became extremely severe. In the slightly dark green mountains covered by leaves, there were lions roaring and tigers howling, cranes dancing and dragons protruding, and thunderous frogs that were supposed to only appear on summer nights. In the deep clouds and mist to the east of the green mountains, where no one dared to enter, a huge shadow appeared faintly. It was unknown what kind of creature it was. Under the greedy and awe-inspiring gaze of countless lives, Chen Changxing emitted a strange fragrance. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, not knowing when he would wake up. The others were desperately fanning the wind beside the bed, trying to fan away the fragrance from Chen Changxing's body, because that fragrance made his mouth drool and gave him a strange and terrifying thought. He had to fan the wind and also fan away this thought. The middle-aged Taoist arrived at the side room at an unknown time. He stood by the couch, looked at Chen Changxing with his eyes tightly closed, and said a sentence that only he understood. "Where is the reason?" One night passed. At the moment when the morning light fell on the green mountains, the fragrance on Chen Changxing's body suddenly disappeared, and he could no longer smell anything. He returned to his former appearance, and the countless strange beasts in the green mountains and the terrifying figure behind the clouds left at an unknown time. The others looked at their sleeping junior brother and finally stopped panicking. They gasped and wanted to wipe away the cold sweat from their forehead, only to find that their shoulders were painfully numb from shaking the fan hard all night. Chen Changxing opened his eyes and woke up. Although he slept soundly all night, he knew what had happened. Looking at his senior brother with a painful expression, his face turned a bit pale and he asked, "Master, what's wrong with me?" The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and remained silent for a long time before saying, "You're sick." According to the middle-aged Taoist, Chen Changxing's disease was due to congenital weakness, and the 9 channels in his body could not be connected. The strange smell last night was that the spirit could not relay the circulation, and had to be discharged with sweat. Those sweat was the indispensable essence of the spirit, and naturally carried a strange smell, which was a strange disease. So, can you treat it? No, no one can. An incurable disease. Is that fate, right? Yes, that's your fate. Since its 10th birthday, the white crane has never been to Qingshan again. The news has been cut off in Kyoto, and the other side of the marriage letter seems to have never appeared. Occasionally, Chen Changxing stands by the river, looking west, and remembers this incident. Of course, what he was thinking more about was his own illness or fate. He didn't become weak, except for being prone to drowsiness. He looked extremely healthy and didn't look like a person who died young. He even began to doubt his master's judgment. But what if the master's judgment is correct? Chen Changxing decided to leave the dilapidated temple and go to the bustling world to see it. While he could still see it, he wanted to go see the legendary Tianshu mausoleum and cancel the marriage. "Teacher, I'm leaving now." "Where are you going?" "Go to Kyoto." "Why?" "Because I want to live." I said, "That's not illness, it's fate. I want to change my life." In the past 800 years, only 3 people have successfully changed their lives. Those are all amazing people, aren't they? Yes. I'm not, but I also want to give it a try. Kyoto, Chen Changxing always has to go, whether he can cure his illness or not only because he wants to change his life, but also because the other side of the marriage letter is in Kyoto. He packed his luggage, took the small sword handed over by his senior brothers, and turned around to leave. A 14-year-old young Taoist, descending the mountain. The beginning of a new journey. Thank you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. I change my mind. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. I change my mind. What kind of person is that young man? He was very calm, sitting for half an hour without changing his posture. He only took a sip of tea at the beginning, probably out of courtesy, and never drank it again. In fact, the first sip of tea only touched his lips, not as reserved, but more like cautious, with a deep mind, a strong sense of vigilance, and even a hint of hostility. It seems like a smart person, at least a little bit clever. How old is he? 14 years old. I remember it should also be that big. It's just that my expression is too calm, and I always feel like it's bigger. Just an ordinary person. Yes. My breath is ordinary, and I clearly haven't even experienced washing my marrow. Although I can't see my potential, I'm already 14 years old. Even if I start practicing again, I don't have a very good future. Even if there is a future, can it still be compared to the disciples of the Chongqing sect leader? Madam, is that engagement real? The token is real, so is the engagement. How could the old master have arranged such a marriage for the young lady back then? If the old master hasn't died yet, or if you can ask the answer. Open the door, I'll go see him. With a creaking sound, the door slowly opened. The clear sunshine poured into the room from outside the courtyard, illuminating all corners, illuminating the beautiful face of the lady in the half-piece of jade pendant tightly held in her hand. The old lady who had spoken to her earlier stood in the corner, covered in shadows all over, and it was even difficult to detect if not carefully examined. With the help of the old lady walked outdoors, walking slowly like the wind brushing a weak willow. The precious golden hairpin in her hair and the pendant on her body made no sound, appearing somewhat eerie. In the courtyard, the tree shadows are mottled, and there are more than 10 large trees surrounded by several people on the lawn that can only be hugged. There are no servants or maids on either side of the stone path, and in the distance, many people can be seen kneeling. The quiet atmosphere is filled with a sense of solemnity, like those trees standing straight towards the sky, or like the cold weapons displayed everywhere in the flower hall. The owner of this mansion is Su Shiji, the renowned Eastern emperor of the Zhou dynasty with outstanding military achievements. The divine general governing the mansion is like governing an army. The mansion has always been serious and quiet because of what happened today. All the servants were driven to the side garden, and the atmosphere here naturally became more oppressive. The spring breeze blowing outside the courtyard walls seemed to be frozen. Mrs. Su walked through the courtyard to the side hall, stopped and looked at the young man in the hall, her eyebrows slightly raised. The young man was wearing an old Taoist robe that had turned white after washing, with a youthful appearance, straight eyebrows and eyes, and bright eyes. There was an indescribable smell, as if he could see the hidden truth in many things, like a mirror. The boy's luggage was placed at his feet, which looked ordinary, but was organized in an extremely organized manner, and there was no trace of the dust during the journey. The hat tied to the luggage was wiped clean. It was not these things that made Mrs. Su raise her eyebrows, but the tea on the table had lost any heat. However, the young man remained calm and showed no signs of annoyance, possessing the calmness and patience that is difficult to possess at this age. This is a difficult person to deal with. Fortunately, such people are often very proud. After entering the Xinjiang mansion, he spoke to the old lady for a few words, but no one paid attention to him anymore. Sitting in the side hall for half an hour, it was inevitable that Chen Chongqing felt a bit bored, but he had been accustomed to solitude since childhood and did not find it difficult to endure. He silently passed the time by memorizing the content of the 6th volume of the Huading Jing, while waiting for the other party to come quickly so that he could return the marriage certificate to the other party. After resolving this matter, he still had many things to do for himself. He did indeed only take a sip of the tea on the table and touch his slightly dry lips, but it was not as cautious or guarded as the old lady had guessed. Instead, he felt that being a guest at someone else's house, if he drank too much tea and wanted to go to the bathroom, it would be a bit impolite. Moreover, although the tea bowls used in the divine general's mansion were all precious roux kiln porcelain, he was still not used to drinking water from other people's objects. In this regard, he has a bit of a cleanliness fetish. He stood up and saluted the lady in splendid attire, guessing that she was probably Lady Su from the divine general's mansion. He thought to himself that he could finally resolve this matter and reached into his arms, preparing to take out the marriage certificate. Mrs. Su gestured not to be in a hurry and sat down leisurely at the main seat. She took the tea served by the steward woman and looked at him calmly, saying, "Have you ever visited the Heavenly Book Mausoleum before? What about the Niha Bridge? Or go to the palace to see the ivy vines? The scenery is also excellent." Chen Chongqing thought to himself that this was just a small talk. He didn't think it was necessary, but since it was an elder speaking, he naturally couldn't lack etiquette. He replied briefly and respectfully, "Not yet. I'll go see it in a few days." Mrs. Su's hand, holding a bowl lid, stopped in mid-air and asked, "So, as soon as you arrived in Kyoto, you came to the general's mansion first?" Chen Chongqing replied honestly, "I dare not delay." "I see." Madame lifted her head and gave him a cold glance, thinking to herself that the dilapidated young man from the remote countryside was not attracted by the magnificent scenery of Kyoto and came directly to the mansion to discuss marriage. Her eagerness to do so was ridiculous. Chen Chongqing didn't understand the meaning of the 4 words, "I see." He stood up and reached into his arms again, ready to take out the marriage certificate and return it to the other party. Since he has made up his mind, he is not prepared to consider more time. However, his actions once again caused a misunderstanding. The lady looked at him with a more indifferent expression and said, "I won't agree to this marriage. Even if you take out the marriage certificate, it's meaningless." Chen Chongqing didn't expect to hear this sentence and was stunned for a moment. The old master was saved by your master many years ago and decided on this marriage. Does this seem like a good story? Mrs. Su looked at him with a cold expression and said. But in reality, that's a beautiful story that can only be found in drama and literature. It can't happen in the real world. Who would believe it except for those foolish literary women? Chen Chongqing wanted to explain that his intention was to withdraw from the marriage. However, as he listened to this condescending words and looked at the undisguised contempt and indifference between Mrs. Su's eyebrows and eyes, he found it difficult to speak. His hand was still in his arms, touching the edge of the slightly hard paper. On one piece of paper was a wedding letter written by Taizai himself, and on another piece of paper was the birth date of a certain little girl written in 8 characters. The old master passed away 4 years ago, and this marriage no longer exists. Mrs. Su looked at the young man in front of her and continued, "I know you are a smart person, so we should talk like smart people. What you need to consider now is not continuing this marriage, but carefully considering what kind of compensation you can get. What do you think of my proposal?" Chen Chongqing took his hand out of his arms and did not hold the marriage certificate. He lowered it to his waist and asked, "Can I ask why?" "Why?" This is not a question that smart people should ask. Mrs. Su looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Because your teacher has good medical skills, but he is still just an ordinary Taoist, and I am here at the Divine General's mansion, because you are a poor young man who can only afford old Taoist clothes, and my daughter is a young lady of the Divine General's mansion, because you are an ordinary person. The Divine General's mansion should not be a place where ordinary people can enter. Is my explanation clear enough?" Chen Chongqing's hand clenched slightly, but his voice did not tremble. "It's very clear." Mrs. Su looked at this still childish face and decided to put more pressure on him. She was well aware of what the smart and proud boy couldn't bear the most, and later he would definitely take the initiative to withdraw. She placed the tea bowl on the table, stood up and said, "This cup of tea on your table is butterfly tea from before the Ming dynasty. Only 5 taels of silver can buy 1 or 2. This tea bowl comes from Ru Kiln and is even more expensive than gold. If the tea is cold and you don't drink it, it means you don't have the life to drink it. You are just a grass root in the mud, not porcelain, just rubble. You want to change your life by climbing onto my God General's mansion. I'm sorry, this may make you happy, but it makes me unhappy." The lady's voice was calm, not deliberately domineering, but pressing her down to the ground. She didn't deliberately stand tall, but seemed to be looking at an ant on the ground from the sky. All these emotions were accurately conveyed to Chen Chongqing. This is a blatant humiliation, especially the phrase, changing one's life by climbing onto the god's mansion. For any proud young man, it is an unacceptable accusation. In order to leave with a high head and pride, many people will probably choose to angrily argue, then take out the marriage certificate and tear it in half, throw it in front of the wife, and even spit twice. And this is exactly what Mrs. Su wants to see. If it weren't for the special nature of that marriage letter, she wouldn't have had a better way. Why bother with all this mental energy like today? The hall was quiet and there was no sound. She looked coldly at Chen Changsheng, waiting for the young man's anger. However, the development of the matter completely exceeded his expectations. Chen Changsheng looked at Mrs. Su calmly and said, "Actually, you misunderstood. I came to the Divine General's mansion this time to return the marriage certificate to the mansion. I was originally here to withdraw my marriage." The whole hall was silent. The wind came from the garden, blowing the old bamboo branches under the corridor with a crackling sound. Madame was slightly surprised and asked, "Can you say it again?" She didn't notice that her voice was a bit nervous and relaxed, as it was hard to imagine due to an accident. Whether the young man didn't want to lose face, said it intentionally, or actually got married, it was all she wanted to see. Chen Changsheng looked at her seriously and said, "Actually, I'm here to get married." In the corner of the side hall, the expression of the nanny who seemed to have disappeared for a long time had changed. Mrs. Su's expression remained unchanged, but her palm lightly landed on her chest. The entire Xinjiang mansion seemed to have become much lighter in this moment. Chen Changsheng's expression suddenly became serious. He said, "But now, I've changed my mind." The spring breeze in the mansion once again became cold, and the atmosphere became extremely oppressive. In the dark corner of the hall, the wrinkles on the grandmother's face were as deep as countless grooves, suddenly washed away by the flood. Mrs. Su suddenly felt that she had done something wrong. She forcefully suppressed the unease that came from an unknown source in her heart, making her voice appear as gentle as possible, and said, "Since I have figured it out, why bother saying such things in frustration? Why not?" However, she was shocked to find that the boy had no intention of continuing to listen to him. Chen Changsheng picked up his luggage from the ground and carried it directly to the outside of the hall. "Oh my, I'm currently with many readers, it's so hot. Thank you all for your hard work, everyone. This story has begun with great force, and I feel that suddenly, I have 100 times more confidence. To write about interesting people, Chen Changsheng must be the most interesting person I have ever written about in my life. We all need to be interesting people. Here, let's not repeat Wang Xiaobo's words." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Why? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Why? Watching the young figure disappear in the side hall, Mrs. Su's face was covered with a layer of frost. She wanted to raise her teacup and drink the tea, which moistened her slightly dry throat. However, she found that the tea in her cup had also cooled down. She wanted to throw the teacup onto the ground to vent her emotions, but she didn't care how expensive the Ru kiln porcelain was, and didn't want the servants to hear the sound and know her emotions at the moment. She is currently in a very bad mood. She can feel the message the teenager wants to convey to herself. "I'm sorry, it may make you unhappy, but at least it can make me happy." Or perhaps it was because she had said similar things to him before. She wanted to change her life by climbing onto my Divine General's mansion. "I'm sorry, this may make you happy, but it makes me unhappy." In fact, the young man always showed great courtesy and showed no signs of losing his composure. He successfully achieved this with just 2 completely different sentences and a final turn and walk, which may also be a natural talent. The nanny's face was also extremely gloomy. She walked up to the lady and whispered, "Is that how you let him go? I used to think he was just a proud young man, but now I realize that he is really a cunning villain. If he really wants to climb up my Divine General's mansion to seek benefits, and is so cautious that he dare not even drink tea, how dare he bring a marriage letter into the mansion? The most troublesome thing is, has anyone seen that marriage letter from the beginning to the present? Mrs. Su knew what Grandma meant, and her face darkened slightly as she said, but since she is a smart person, she should know that in order to get more benefits, she won't do everything at the beginning. Chen Changxing didn't understand what happened today. Although he had come to withdraw from the marriage, how did it end up in the current situation? He couldn't understand even more. The Divine General's mansion clearly had many ways to resolve this engagement, but why did Mrs. Su, who looked very shrewd, choose this most foolish method? There were many things that he couldn't understand. He stopped thinking and only thought about Mrs. Su's domineering words in the hall. He couldn't help but be curious about the Miss Su's appearance. Is it beautiful? Of course, growing up in such a mansion, one's temperament cannot be too gentle and kind. The Xinjiang mansion was extremely large, even larger than the entire Xining town. Without any servants to guide him, he naturally got lost. When he discovered this fact, he was outside a secluded forest, thinking about the stories recorded in the books he had read about his dilapidated son.in.law being secretly murdered by his shameless father.in.law. He felt a little uneasy, but also found his thoughts uninteresting. At this moment, he felt a gaze fall on himself. Turning his head, he saw a girl standing at the end of a stone arch by the tree path, only to realize that he was not lost, but deliberately led here. That girl is about 13 or 14 years old. She is dressed in gorgeous clothes, and any accessory on her body is worth more than her entire family business. She has a beautiful appearance, and as she grows older, she is definitely a beautiful woman. Her black eyes are rolling around, very cute, but her gaze is particularly bold. She looks at him from head to foot, scorching and powerful. Chen Changxing was slightly surprised and thought to himself, is this Miss Su from the Su mansion? He has been reading classics since childhood and has excellent patience. He allows the other party to scrutinize him like this without asking any questions. In the end, it was the little girl who said the first sentence. Can Taoists also get married? Chen Changxing noticed that the other person's gaze fell on his own Taoist bun and explained, I'm not a Taoist. Although I'm wearing a Taoist robe and tied in a Taoist bun, that's just a common habit and doesn't mean I'm a Taoist. The little girl walked up to him and looked at him with a serious expression, asking, are you an ordinary person? Chen Changxing was stunned for a moment before understanding what she meant by an ordinary person. He replied, yes, I have never practiced. The little girl didn't notice that he was talking about not practicing, not knowing how to practice. She stared into his eyes and asked very seriously, do you really have an engagement with Mississippi? Upon hearing these words, Chen Changxing realized that this little girl was not the Miss Su that he had imagined. He felt a little relaxed, but for some reason, he also felt a little disappointed. Who is the girl? My name is Schwanger, and I am Mrs. Personal Maid. Chen Changxing had never imagined that a maid could wear such beautiful clothes. He remembered that there was no one around at this moment, and he had a clearer understanding of the maid and even the young lady's position in the Divine General's mansion. I do have an engagement with your young lady. The maid named Schwanger looked at him seriously and said, never say this again in the future. Why? Chen Changxing asked seriously. Schwanger looked at his appearance and felt a little annoyed for some reason. She said, you're just an ordinary person, how could you possibly be with my young lady? It's better to hand over the marriage certificate quickly, otherwise it won't be good for you either. Chen Changxing looked at him and asked seriously, why? Still these 3 words. Schwanger looked at the upright eyebrows and eyes of the young Taoist and suddenly sympathized with him, saying, if you want to survive, don't mention this engagement to anyone, otherwise no one can save your life. She felt that she was genuinely thinking for the sake of this poor young man from the countryside. Although it was impossible for the young lady to marry him, considering that she had a previous engagement and knew this person, she had to let the other person live well. But she never thought that this sentence would sound more like a shameless threat to the other person's ears. Chen Changxing remained silent, thinking to himself, could the Divine General's mansion really take a black hand on him? In the books he has read, as well as in the plays and texts, there are similar stories, but now that the Holy Empress is in power, who dares to do such a thing in Kyoto? He said, the Divine General's mansion wants me to die, and my wife wouldn't have let me leave earlier. If I'm not mistaken, that old lady must be a very powerful person. After all, few servants have seen me and killed me directly, burying me under the flowers as fertilizer. No one will know, right? Since I'm still alive, then there shouldn't be anything wrong. Schwanger sneered, countless pairs of eyes are staring at the Divine General's mansion, so inside the mansion, you are actually safe. But if you continue to talk nonsense like before outside the mansion, how long do you think you can live? Chen Chongqing thought for a moment and said, I don't understand. Schwanger said, if people knew that you were engaged to a young lady, what would the Chongqing sect think? What would the Chushan family think? Even in the capital, no one can stop those people from trying to kill you. Chen Chongqing asked, Chongqing sect and Chushan family. What is this place? Schwanger looked at him like an idiot and asked, you don't know anything. Chen Chongqing was puzzled and asked, what should I know? There are some things that the young Taoist from Xining Town doesn't know, but those things are known throughout the world. For example, the current period of the Zhou dynasty is the Orthodox era. For example, Su Shiji, the divine general of the Eastern Palace, is highly trusted by the Empress Dowager. His father was the former Grand Preceptor, but his status now mainly comes from his daughter. Su Shiji only has one daughter, Su Yorong, who is the reincarnation of the heavenly phoenix and has an unimaginable talent and bloodline. She successfully cleansed her marrow at a very young age and went to the southern Holy Maiden Peak to study the heavenly scripture at the age of 12. It is said that she has now broken through the realm of sitting photos and is widely known in the world. She is respected by the people and is considered the best candidate for the next generation of saints in the Light God sect. A girl with almost perfect background, bloodline, and school background naturally has many admirers. It is said that even the legendary bloodthirsty young master of the demon clan is her fervent admirer. However, when it comes to where Su Yorong may fall in the future, people often only mention one name, which is equally dazzling. Autumn Mountain Lord. The Chushan family is the largest clan in the south. This generation of Chushan family has produced a brilliant young son named Chushan Jun, who is said to be the reincarnation of the divine dragon. He is the eldest disciple of the Chongqing sect and the head of the 7 laws of the divine kingdom. He practiced with the elders of the southern sect and is 18 years old this year. He is widely recognized as the most likely candidate to become the strongest in the eastern land for the next few hundred years. Tianfeng and Shenlong, as well as Chushan Jun and Su Yorong, are the most dazzling objects of the younger generation, and there can never be a third young person of the same level. The whole world knows that Chushan Jun has always admired Su Yorong and has been silently waiting for her to grow up. The senior disciples of the Chongqing sect, the people of the great Zhou dynasty, and the Chushan family all believe that this must be a match made in heaven and earth. Miss Mou in the imperial palace of the great Zhou has once said that even the Holy Empress and the elderly family have high hopes for this beautiful story in the world. However, suddenly a young Taoist came to the general's mansion with his engagement. He said he was Su Yorong's fiancée. If this matter is allowed to spread, or perhaps the entire continent would be stunned. The garden is quiet, with bamboo leaves blown by the wind through the stone arch. Now you know, Schwanger looked at Chen Chongqing and said, you are just an ordinary person, separated from Mrs. World by a vast Milky Way, and you will never be able to cross it. For your own sake, it's best to forget about this matter. Chen Chongqing did not expect that the girl he was engaged to be such a remarkable figure. After thinking for a moment, he asked, why didn't Madame tell me earlier? Schwanger said, because Madame doesn't want you to know these things and make more demands. He looked up at her and asked, why are you telling me? Schwanger said, because Miss mentioned you in the letter, she is a kind-hearted person. Although she won't marry you, she won't want to watch you die inexplicably. Moreover, I think you should be a smart person. After knowing these things, you should have enough self-awareness to make the only right decision. Chen Changxing said, I understand. After saying these words, he walked towards the side of the arch, and the soles of his shoes rustled against the bamboo leaves. Shuang'er was stunned and thought to herself, what is this all about? Chen Changxing suddenly stopped and turned to look at her. Shuang'er breathed a sigh of relief and lightly caressed her chest, waiting for his decision. Chen Changxing looked at her and asked, I'm going out, which way should I go? A while ago, let's take it slow. In about 10 days, I will present the overall atmosphere of this story to everyone, and then we will move forward vigorously. Thank you all for taking so much care. Thank you very much. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. This is a tacky name, but it's my name. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. This is a tacky name, but it's my name. Shuang'er didn't wake up until a while later. She could see that the young Taoist was not deliberately mocking or teasing herself, but rather did not listen to what she had said. Looking at the other person's serious and calm expression, she became even angrier for some reason. She said with hatred, you will die. Chen Changxing opened his eyes wide and said, everyone will die. Shuang'er said, you know that's not what I meant. Chen Changxing said seriously, thank you for telling me these things. Shuang'er's face looked very unpleasant and she said, Madam, if you agree, you will get back. Why must you be angry and say you're here to withdraw? Do you think this can save some face? If it's really like this, why did you change your mind in the end? The repeated appearance is really not good. Looking. Actually, I really came to divorce. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not, it's just that I really don't want to divorce now. Why? Chen Changxing tilted his head and thought seriously for a moment. A smile gradually appeared on his immature face, as he confirmed that he had found a reason to convince himself. He said, because you didn't ask for my name. Shuang'er didn't understand. Since entering the mansion, neither madam nor you have asked for my name. Chen Changxing looked at her seriously and said, my name is Chen Changxing. I know this name is very vulgar, but my master hopes that I can live forever and have a good intention, so I have been using this name. When he said this, his eyes were very bright and his expression was very upright. Shuang'er suddenly felt that this seemingly ordinary young Taoist had a certain luster on his body, probably that serious temperament. She understood his reasons and inexplicably felt ashamed of herself. Since entering the Xinjiang mansion, no one has asked for his name. But he did not show any feeling of anger or humiliation. Whether facing his wife or Shuang'er, he showed great politeness, without any lack of courtesy, and even appeared a bit dull. But what's wonderful is that those who made him unhappy ultimately became even more unpleasant than him. It's not that he's good at making people unhappy, but that he's seriously doing what he thinks should be done. Regardless of whether he withdraws or changes his mind, he believes it is right and is extremely certain, to the extent that it creates an undeniable feeling. As a result, those who make him unhappy will eventually become depressed and unable to be happy. Shuang'er has been living in the Divine General's mansion since childhood. Due to the young lady's influence, she holds a very high status. Even the Divine General and his wife have no harsh words towards her, and she has never encountered someone like Chen Changxing. She was not used to this feeling and instinctively felt uneasy. She didn't know if it was to persuade Chen Changxing or herself, so she spoke with a stronger tone. In the whole continent, only my young lady has the blood of a true phoenix, she is unique. There is a sentence in my senior brother's notes that I have always found very reasonable. I am giving it to you at this time, hoping that you can understand it seriously in the future. He said. Everyone is unique in the world. Chen Changxing looked at her and said seriously. At the end of the long street, there is a rudimentary stone arch bridge. Under the bridge is not the Luo River, but an inconspicuous small ditch. Chen Changxing walked onto the bridge and turned to look in the direction of the general's mansion. He saw that it was quiet, but not less bustling. There were countless large mansions and beautiful courtyards, among which the Su mansion was the most prominent and prominent. He couldn't help but shake his head. After entering Kyoto, he did not go to those scenic spots, nor was he in a hurry to go to the Tianshu mausoleum. Instead, he briefly cleaned up by the Luo River and went directly to the general's mansion. He wanted to get married. He is really anxious. If he gets married to the miss of the general's mansion and his illness cannot be cured, why bother to implicate him? Even if it can be cured, it will probably take many years of time. He didn't want to delay the other party's youth, but he didn't expect to face those white eyes, contempt, and ridicule in the Su mansion. Looking back now, since the age of 10, the temple has not received any gifts from the other party, and the two sides have cut off communication, indicating that the other party has long regretted their marriage. He came to Kyoto today to voluntarily withdraw his marriage, which was a natural and mutually willing thing, but he did not expect to encounter such a battle, so he changed his mind on the spot. He did not practice, nor was he a Taoist, but he had been deeply influenced by the teachings of the Taoist scriptures since childhood. Coupled with his own bleak fate, the Tao of 3000 is what he seeks. The So. Called smoothness of the heart, which means peace of mind. Coming all the way to Kyoto to divorce is a heartfelt gesture. Not withdrawing from marriage is also fulfilling one's wishes. If the divine general's mansion is impolite, he does not want the other party to fulfill his wishes. Because that would make it difficult for him to fulfill his wishes. Of course, until now, Chen Changxing has only wanted the general's wife who hides indifference behind a kind face and the maid who only knows how to look at the sky to be anxious. In a few days, he will naturally return the marriage certificate to the other party. Life is at stake, and the happiness of Miss Su's entire life is much more important than the coldness she has suffered, and he still believes so. However, it is still very unpleasant after all. Sometimes, Chen Changxing forgets that he is still a 14-year-old boy, but he is still a teenager. He has his own pride and dignity, and there will always be emotions when he is humiliated. He walked off the stone bridge, bought 2 xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, from the street stall, squatted on the flagstone beside the river, chewed xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, and looked at the Xinjiang mansion in the distance, feeling slightly sad. He knows where this emotion comes from, but he is even more aware that if left unchecked, it will harm the body and not be helpful in solving the problem. On the water surface of the Luo River in the distance, the shadows of sails are like clouds. On the long street across the river, there are wolf riders from the west. From afar, it seems that one can smell the stench in the mouths of those giant wolves. A shadow drifted over the water, and he looked up to see a celestial horse with snow-white wings dragging a magnificent chariot towards the north. At the arrow tower on the distant city wall, the red eagles responsible for military communication kept taking off and landing. In the distant blue sky, there were flying chariots of the patrol officer patrolling the 4 directions, looking like those annoying dragonflies outside the temple. This is the capital of the Zhou dynasty, with countless magical scenes that are unimaginable for the rural commoners. Chen Changxing chewed xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, opened his eyes wide, and looked at these pictures with relish, comparing them with the records on Daozang. He wondered when he would have the chance to see the legendary magical things, such as the turtle bearing the stone pillar for more than 3,000 years in the palace. I wonder if there are any more legendary noble and majestic dragons in the Taoist palace. It is said that the rarest and most noble golden dragon has not appeared in the world for tens of thousands of years, and he will have the chance to see them in the future. By the way, there is also the rumored phoenix xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, is very fragrant and hard. It takes a lot of time to eat. Chen Changxing thought he had completely forgotten all his experiences in the divine general's mansion and successfully dispelled those slightly sour emotions. However, when he thought of the word phoenix, he naturally remembered the true phoenix blood he had only heard about today, the Miss Su mansion who possessed the true phoenix blood, and the small things he had received many years ago. He looked at the last piece of xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, between his fingers. After a while, he put it into his lips and chewed it carefully for 32 times before swallowing it into his stomach. He took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped the debris off his hands. He got up and carried his luggage and disappeared into the crowd. He didn't notice that there was an inconspicuous carriage parked at a nearby street corner. In an inconspicuous spot on the shaft, there was a slightly dimly colored emblem of the blood phoenix. Of course, even if he saw it, he wouldn't know that this emblem represented the Dongyu Divine General's mansion. After the birth of Miss Su, the Empress Dowager bestowed the blood phoenix on the Divine General's mansion as a new emblem, which was a supreme honor and a kind of declaration. The warhorse in front of the carriage has the bloodline of a unicorn, looking at the flowing water under the bridge with indifferent eyes. The old woman's gaze in the carriage was also indifferent, but there was also some surprise and vigilance hidden in it. Since Chen Changxing left the Xinjiang mansion, she has been following him all along. She did not expect that the young man could behave so calmly after seeing the capital of the Zhou dynasty, completely unlike an ignorant rural child. That's because she didn't know that the boy had read countless books since childhood, had already seen countless landscapes and traveled countless miles in them. Su Shiji sat in the study, with a towering figure emitting a faint smell of blood. Through the window, the emerald bird on the tree, more than 10 zhang away, hid its head under its wings in fear and dared not make any sound. The powerful aura with a bloody aura proved the terrifying strength of this great Zhou divine general and also indicated that his current mood is very bad. What made him so irritable was the half-piece of jade pendant on the desk. In those days, my father was in the position of Taizai and was trusted by the Queen of God. He was ordered to go to Mount Taishan to preside over the burning of books in the ceremony. The demons sent Gong Yangchen to assassinate my father secretly in order to destroy it. My father was seriously injured. The Pope went to Mount Taishan personally and could not cure him. It was only when a wandering Taoist passed through Mount Taishan County that he cured his father's injury, so the marriage agreement was made. Mrs. Su whispered, so it seems that Taoist has some skills. Su Shiji lifted his head and looked at the blue sky outside the window, saying, in the vast world, there are countless strong men and women. That Taoist can be called a saint in the field of medicine. Of course, he is extraordinary. Otherwise, how could my father betroth Ronger to his descendants? Mrs. Su felt a bit uneasy and asked, the most crucial thing now is the marriage certificate. If that Taoist has little background and is not an important figure, managing things will not be too difficult. Su Shiji said coldly, let that little Taoist be more sober. Mrs. Su's voice became even lower, and if she wasn't careful, she couldn't even hear clearly. That little Taoist doesn't seem to be someone who can be sent away at will. What if he persists in fighting? Next year, when the Tianshu mausoleum opens, the southern sages will definitely send an envoy. I'm afraid they will officially propose marriage to the court, but there won't be any problems. Su Shiji squinted his eyes slightly, like a tiger about to sleep, and said, then burn him into ashes and throw him into the Luo River. In a few days, it will be the rainy season, and the Luo River is about to rise. Whether it is ash or bone, if it falls into the river, it will disappear instantly. Because I have been away all along, I have written a bit carelessly. After returning home, I will revise the previous chapters. The title of this chapter is My Heartfelt Voice. Everyone, hello. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Tiandaoyuan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Tiandaoyuan. Like every morning in the past 14 years, Chen Changxing woke up at 5 o'clock, immediately opened his eyes, used his 5-breath time to calm down, turned over, got up, put on his shoes, made a bed, and started washing up. I ate a bowl of duck congee and 4 hot meat buns in the front hall of the inn, returned to the guest room, rinsed my mouth again with last night's old tea, dressed myself in front of the bronze mirror, and then walked to the courtyard. Now he is not in the small temple in Xining town, and there is no need to cut firewood or carry water. Facing the newborn morning mist and the distant sky, he closes his eyes and begins to meditate. He silently recites the scroll in his mind until he feels refreshed, and finally completes his homework. He walks from the side door to the bustling streets of Kyoto, where he inconspicuously joins the crowd and begins a day of life. He had a list in his hand, which contained the names of several colleges in Kyoto. After asking the prefect for the address of the first college, he quickened his pace. He didn't notice that there was a carriage following him from behind, and didn't notice that the horse had unicorn bloodline, let alone the somewhat hidden blood phoenix emblem on the shaft. Countless years ago, the heavenly book came into being, and the wisdom of the people opened up, developing a school without mathematics. However, all changes are inseparable from its roots, and tracing its origins is included in the Taoist scriptures, including agriculture, industry, and commerce. The most authoritative standard for evaluating these is now recognized as the annual Great Court Examination of the Zhou dynasty. The Great Court Examination was initiated by Emperor Taizu of the Great Zhou dynasty. Whether serving as an official in the court, a general in the army, or a priest in the state religion, the results of the Great Court Examination are the most important criterion. The most crucial thing is that Emperor Taizu explicitly ordered that only those who were ranked in the top 3 in the imperial examination were eligible to enter the Heavenly Book Mausoleum to observe the Heavenly Book. Because of this rule, there were countless strong people in the world who would come to Kyoto at the beginning of each year. During the first imperial examination, Emperor Taizu stood on the city wall, watching the talents of various sects in the mainland enter like crucian carp, laughing and saying a famous sentence, which established the position of the imperial examination. Southern countries, especially secular sects such as the Chongqing sect, are naturally extremely dissatisfied with this rule. In their view, although the Heavenly Book Mausoleum is located in the capital of the Great Zhou dynasty, it is a divine stone descended from the world, and of course, it is a shared wealth of the entire continent. For this reason, the South has boycotted the Great Korean Test several times, and the relationship between the two sides has become extremely strained. However, the Heavenly Book Mausoleum is too important for practitioners. Although the Great Zhou dynasty was strong, it could not take advantage of the world's great injustice to monopolize it. The various forces in the South could not resist the temptation to enter the Heavenly Book Mausoleum monument. Even during the period when the demon clan was repelled and the two sides gradually distanced themselves, there were still many strong southern sects who participated in the Great Court Examination in their private names. After the reign of Emperor Jisheng, the Great Zhou dynasty finally reached an agreement with various southern powers. The various sects of the southern countries could send their own envoys to participate in the Great Zhou dynasty's imperial examination, and the evaluation would be based on both sides. Southern students could not accept the Grand Zhou dynasty's titles and honors, while the rest were treated equally. In addition, the Great Zhou examination had a brand new name in this new agreement. For countless years, the Great Court Examination has selected countless strong individuals. It is said that the strongest individuals on the mainland have had the experience of coming to the capital of the Zhou dynasty to participate in the Great Court Examination. The more well-known fact is that the contemporary pope of the state religion, the elder of the southern Holy Maiden Peak, were once outstanding in the Great Court Examination. Not to mention that some geniuses of the Western demon race have transformed into human beings to participate in the Great Court Examination. Even the demon race once had a young ruler who risked coming to Kyoto, but was discovered by the previous pope and used the great divine technique to directly suppress them as smoke. That's all stories from many years ago. What people are more concerned about now is whether the Chushan Jun of the Chongqing sect will participate in next year's Great Court exam, how many of the 7 laws of the Divine Kingdom can advance to the first level, and whether Su Yorong will break through ahead of schedule and leave the Holy Maiden Peak to return to Kyoto. Will the genius powerhouse known for his coldness and mystery in the demon wilderness appear for the first time in front of the world, or will he continue to chase each other bloody with the demon powerhouse? Besides these, what people in Kyoto are most concerned about is what dazzling geniuses will appear in Kyoto Academy. Yes, there are many colleges in Kyoto. Under strict government regulations, the Holy Empress ruled with a clear and honest government, and the people's lives gradually improved. Over the past few decades, it has been a prosperous era with a peaceful sea and clear rivers. Various colleges have sprung up like mushrooms after rain, and even a few years ago, there were many private colleges specifically aimed at the imperial examination and taught by strong Chinese educators in secret. Of course, the most famous and powerful colleges are still the ones with the longest history, with two of them having a history even longer than that of the Zhou dynasty. There are 6 colleges on Chen Changxing's list, and the Tiandao Academy he went to at this time ranks first. In fact, throughout the entire continent, Tiandao Academy is qualified to rank at the forefront. In the past 200 years, students of Tiandao Academy have achieved a total of 20.4 first place in the imperial examination, and all students studying here are exceptionally talented. This academy has delivered many important deities to the Chinese religion and dedicated countless spiritual talents to various sections. Most importantly, the contemporary Chinese Pope was once a student of this academy. The Tiandao Academy has achieved the best results in the history of the imperial examination and is naturally the most difficult to enter, but the number of applicants is still the highest. Chen Changxing walked to the entrance of the Heavenly Tao Academy and looked at the towering and majestic Mou gate. He naturally felt a sense of admiration and longing as he looked at the name of the courtyard personally inscribed by Emperor Taizu. However, immediately after, this emotion was completely dissipated by the bustling environment of the courtyard gate, as well as the pungent smell of sweat and ink. He instinctively lowered his head. When he left Xining, he had already calculated the time accurately. When he arrived in Kyoto, it was the spring enrollment date for various colleges. He could also imagine that there would be a huge number of applicants for Tiandao Academy, but he did not expect it to be so terrifying. Especially the group of young people at the entrance with tired expressions, standing crooked and pointing at the crowd, made him feel a bit uncomfortable. The clothes worn by those young people are similar in style, generally black, with a gold belt around the waist, and should be the courtyard clothes of the Heavenly Tao Academy. Chen Changxing knew that these people were probably old students who did not pass the imperial examination at the beginning of the year. These people were arrogant, but their morale was hard to calm because they failed the exam. They would not have a good face towards the new students who came to apply for Tiandao Academy today. Listening to those sharp and sarcastic words and looking at the mockery in the eyes of those young people, he instinctively lowered his head a bit. Lowering his head is not because he is afraid of anything, but because he has a slight cleanliness fetish, both physically and mentally, so he doesn't want to smell the sweat and odor emitted by the crowd, nor does he want to hear those words. Look at that idiot, he looks like a pig with a few pockmarks on his face. He even wants to insert a fan into his neck, thinking he's a molting young master. I don't even think about it. The 1,000 layers of flesh on Ye's neck are almost breaking the fan. Not bad, looking at his floating footsteps, he has only just washed his marrow within 2 months at most. I'm afraid he hasn't even survived the physical and mental exhaustion yet. How dare he apply to our Heavenly Tao Academy? He thinks where we are here. The National Education Academy. Haha. I don't even understand what these idiots think. Do you think that with that weak and pitiful divine knowledge, you can also understand the Tao? General knowledge and Taoist scripture. Even if you read like a fool, you wouldn't dare to say such a thing. You sympathize with the suffering of that idiot at the time, but I sympathize with his parents. Being humiliated later is the second most important thing. The silver money that was spent before cannot be recovered. If I were the parents of that idiot and chubby person, it would be better to use that money to seek some pills in the education industry, reduce some fat, and at least marry a wife. What if he marries a wife? Even Han Meidan only cares about himself. In the future, he will have 17 or 18 sons and daughters, and he will be as obese and foolish as he is. Is raising a pig and raising a litter a good thing? The students laughed heartily and talked recklessly about the candidates, their language was extremely unpleasant, and they didn't even control the volume. They might even deliberately want the object being discussed to listen, which was extremely despicable. The fat young man who was being discussed had a flushed face, but he didn't dare to resist at all, because those students were telling the truth. He had just finished his studies more than 10 days ago, and there was little chance of getting into the Heavenly Way Academy. Most importantly, even if he was unlucky enough to enter the academy, he couldn't offend these seniors. Chen Changxing walked through the crowd, listening to those vulgar words, his eyebrows slightly raised, thinking to himself, if it was him who was being discussed, I don't know if he can hold back. Fortunately, he lowered his head and his breath was too ordinary to be noticed in the crowd, so he luckily avoided being mocked and walked smoothly through the entrance of the Moyu courtyard. Because he was thinking about these things and lowering his head, he didn't notice that there were two huge stone walls on both sides of the stone path leading into the Heavenly Tao Academy, carved with strange flower gods and monsters, and in the middle were hundreds of names written densely, seemingly a list. Many eyes fell on those names, fervent and admiring. The family and servants who came with the newly applied students were not allowed to enter the Heavenly Way Academy, so when they entered the courtyard, the environment suddenly became quieter. Chen Changxing took out a pure white handkerchief from his sleeve, wiped away the fine beads of sweat on his forehead, and breathed a sigh of relief. Following the student in front, they lined up behind a long queue. There are many people applying for the Tiandaoyuan Academy, and the queue is very long. It looks like the legendary Baizhang Qi snake in the Western Demon Realm, stretching from the distant buildings all the way to the grassland, and even crossing a clear river in the middle. Many of the new students who apply stand on the wooden bridge on the river, their faces turning a little pale with the cold wind of early spring. Quickly, someone walked out of the building, consisting of young girls and boys. Their faces were as pale as those of their companions on the bridge, and they looked very ugly. Since they were not frozen, the exam was definitely going very poorly. The people who were still waiting in line looked at their lost spirits and immediately became nervous, with no mood for chatting anymore. Chen Changxing doesn't know anyone, so naturally there is no chatting. He looked at the building in the distance and appeared somewhat curious. He was only concerned about the enrollment exam of Tiandaoyuan Academy now. Is it like what was mentioned in the book, or is it using the same method? Why did these people who did not pass lose so quickly? Or have the exams at Tiandaoyuan Academy really changed? The crowd kept moving forward, crossing the grassland and the creek before approaching the building, and finally arrived at a row of bamboo sheds. Looking at the serious-looking Tiandaoyuan teacher behind the stone table and the dark volcanic rock on the table, Chen Changxing recognized what it was and remembered an old lawsuit he had seen in the Daowan. He was slightly stunned. Did you not expect such an early update? Horizontally. Tomorrow I'm going to EP1-10 to participate in an event, which should be related to the signing of the Tianji. In Shanghai, it seems like noon, but it said that I have to wake up early in the morning. My feeling is that I'm really dizzy from running. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Youth in Green Clothes 36. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Youth in Green Clothes 36 The teenagers participating in the Tiandaoyuan enrollment exam, under the command of the serious-looking teacher, stepped forward one by one to pick up the stone and tightly grasp the 3-breath time. Most of the time, the black stone shines slightly in people's hands, with some subtle differences between light and dark. Only a few people pick up the stone without any change. That dark rock has a very common name. Induction Stone. There is a scripture in the Taoist collection that tells the story of the strange production of mountains, rivers, and seas, called the Sutra of All Things. Chen Changxing once saw the picture of this stone in that scripture and knew its magic. This black stone naturally contains a kind of divine energy. As soon as it meets the human body, it will split into a strand and enter the human body, stimulating its own true element, and then it is like fishing, take a strand of that person's true element back into the black stone. The more abundant the true element in the person holding the stone, the stronger their spiritual awareness, and the more supplements the black stone receives, the brighter it will be. After many years of experimentation, humans have developed a set of rules that can determine a person's strength based on the brightness of the black stone. The number of applicants for Tiandao Academy is too high every year, which is why such an introductory assessment process is added. Someone kept reaching out to grab the black stone, either bright or bright, some continued to move towards the building, while others were coldly signaled by the teacher to leave the team, creating a particularly oppressive atmosphere. A young man held on to the black stone, but it showed no response. When signaled to leave, the boy was particularly desperate, crying and pleading for another chance. He tightly held on to the stone and refused to let it go. He was immediately dragged away by the servants of the Heavenly Tao Academy, only to provoke a burst of ridicule, which was meaningless. The assessment is still ongoing. Those who can make the black stone brighter have a joyful expression on their faces, while those who cannot make the stone brighter are extremely discouraged. On the side of Shiha, there could be faint laughter from the old students, while the teacher in charge of sensing stone assessment looked increasingly ugly. Since the early morning assessment, hundreds of people have held the induction stone. Although many people can make the induction stone brighter, proving that they have successfully washed their marrow, compared to previous years, the level of performance of these candidates this year is too ordinary. There was only 1/3 level of marrow washing in front of them, and not even a person with a complete marrow washing state. As for the genius who can enter the sitting state at a young age, it is completely invisible. The teacher's emotions are naturally not very good. There are many differences in human cultivation compared to the demon and demon races. At the beginning, it was emphasized to learn with joyful intelligence, to understand with nourishing spiritual consciousness, to use wisdom to understand the principles of tomorrow and the earth, to use spiritual consciousness to use the power of heaven and earth, to use energy to refine the body, starting from the skin and hair, to the fascia and muscles, until deep into the bone marrow, to become strong, capable of lifting stones, healthy and fearless of common diseases, hence the name wash. Marrow. The demon race's innate body is as strong as gold and stone. If humans did not pass the process of marrow washing, they would not be able to fight against each other on the battlefield. Therefore, in the human army, at least a preliminary success in marrow washing is necessary to be qualified to serve as elite wild warriors. In addition, the importance of marrow washing is also more crucial, reflected in other aspects. Besides strengthening muscles and bones, marrow washing can also broaden the mind, greatly improve memory and analytical abilities. To summarize, as stated in the general theory of Taoism, it is to see another world. The Great Way is 3000, this is just a general statement. The world's classics are vast like a sea, and countless ink characters represent countless knowledge. If one does not cleanse the soul, be wise, and have a pure heart, how can one dare to cross the sea to seek knowledge? Relying solely on courage to venture, one is afraid of getting lost in an instant and being beaten to death by the raging waves. The assessment step added by the Heavenly Tao Academy in recent years is actually a very reasonable thing to think about. You have not even succeeded in washing your marrow, so what qualifications do you have to practice those profound methods? Yesterday at the Xinjiang mansion, Chen Changxing admitted twice that he had never practiced, and naturally, he did not succeed in washing his marrow. This means that when he grabbed the black stone later, it would not change at all. He would be expelled from the application team by the teacher, but strangely, his expression was calm and he didn't seem to be very worried. At this point, he was already very close to the table, with only 3 people in front. At the forefront was a young man wearing a thin blue robe. He walked up to the table and, without waiting for the teacher from the Heavenly Tao Academy to speak, reached out and picked up the dark sensing stone. For some reason, at this moment, everyone felt a bit nervous. Perhaps it was because the young man in green appeared too calm. In early spring, Kyoto was shrouded in clouds, with the sun behind it. The Tiandao courtyard was clear and serene. Suddenly, the grasslands on both sides of the creek and river became extremely bright. The tender green newly sprouted grass branches seemed to become jade twigs, and the remaining dewdrops became pearls. In the clear stream, the delicate swimming fish stared at the sky, stiffened by the sudden arrival of light. People subconsciously cover their eyes, thinking that it is the light brought by the clouds breaking through the sunrise, and only then do they realize that even the brightest spring day cannot be so bright. If it weren't for sunlight. Then where does this light come from? The brightness gradually faded, and the eyes adapted slightly. People put down their blindfolded hands and saw the teacher from the Heavenly Tao Academy open his mouth, with an incredible expression on his face. At the same time, people also saw where the light came from. From the palm of the young man in green, the dark sensing stone, which seemed to have become the hottest stone in the volcano, emitting countless lights from his fingers as if it was burning. Sitting photo scene. Is it actually? Sitting photo scene. The teacher from the Heavenly Taoist Academy said with a trembling voice. At this moment, he looked at the young man in green, as if looking at a precious jade. He quickly stood up and walked up to the other person, looking greedily at his palm and the leaked light. No one felt that this teacher was impolite, you know. The young man in green still had a childish expression on his face, clearly not over 16 years old, but already in a sitting state. What does this mean? What is a genius? This is genius. The old students on the other side of the creek had already stopped mocking, and they looked down at the bamboo shed like ghosts. The old man who had spoken the most harshly before was so shocked that he slipped off the stone bench and fell to the ground. However, he couldn't feel the pain coming from his coccyx and trembled in shock, saying, "How could it be?" Senior brother Guanbai only entered the sitting photo realm when he was 16 years old. Is this kid born with a tender face? Otherwise, how could it be? At this moment, an old and indifferent voice came from behind them. Since he is Tang 36, it's impossible. Tang 36. Is he Tang 36? The crowd was even more shocked and they heard the name. Someone said, he is already ranked 36th on the Qinyun list. How could he leave Wenshui to come to Kyoto? For next year's imperial examination. But with his ability, there is no problem wanting to enter the Tiandaoyuan. Someone explained, Tang 36 is the most aloof and arrogant, and no one is convinced. Not to mention the 7 laws of the divine kingdom, even the wolf cub from the north is not convinced. Since he is going to participate in next year's imperial examination, he must want to change his name. So, naturally, he will come to Kyoto early. Since he comes to Kyoto, of course, he will enter our Heavenly Tao Academy. When it comes to the name of Tang 36, Zhuxing thought of the rumors about this talented young man from Wenshui and couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Some people also said, other people in the 7 laws of the divine kingdom can disobey it. Does he dare to disobey the Lord of Chushan? That's unknown, but judging from the brightness of the black stone earlier, I'm afraid he still has some reservations. Even if it's not as perfect as the initial photo, I'm afraid it won't be too far away. Everyone was discussing and suddenly remembered the old voice from before. Looking back in shock, they found that the person who came was the most terrifying Vice Dean Zhuang of the Heavenly Taoist Academy. They couldn't help but jump and bow their heads repeatedly, causing birds and beasts to disperse. A strong person or genius should naturally be baptized by the gaze of others. The young girls who participated in the Tiandao Academy assessment did not recognize the origin of the young man in blue, but their feelings were even more shocking. Looking at his back, they showed a sense of fear and awe. Chen Changsheng looked at the young man in green and admired him greatly. He didn't have such talent, so he was a bit envious. The young man in green walked forward with a cold expression, and soon entered the building deep in the Heavenly Tao Academy. The assessment of the others continued, and soon it was finally Chen Changsheng's turn. He walked up to the table and looked at the rough, dark rock with countless small holes on its surface. After hesitating for a moment, he reached out and grabbed the black stone, raised it in front of him, and began to scrutinize it carefully. He clearly felt a cool and pleasant breath overflowing from a small hole in the black stone, entering his body through the palm of his hand, and then rapidly circulating in his meridians, attempting to search for his true element in deeper places such as the sun-sea burning wheel. The cool breath was clearly unconscious and had no malicious intent. He did not resist and allowed it to search everywhere. Of course, even if he wanted to resist, he had no ability, but he was very clear that there were some problems with his meridians. Before starting to treat his illness, he could not have discovered any trace of that breath. Since there was no return of true elements or spiritual induction, Blackstone naturally won't become bright either. There was no accident, Blackstone was still Blackstone, lying quietly in his palm. He put the black stone back on the table and looked at the teacher from the Heavenly Taoist Academy, saying, "It's not bright." In the eyes of onlookers, he just picked up the stone and put it down. Such an obvious fact, but he confirmed it so solemnly, which seemed a bit ridiculous. Strangely, no one laughed out loud. Looking at his upright expression, people always felt a bit strange. The young men who couldn't make the black stone shine in front of him would feel a bit embarrassed, and also feel dejected due to failure. He may even cry bitterly like the embarrassed boy before, but he is too calm. Can't he understand what this means? It doesn't look like it. The teacher frowned slightly. He should have waved his hand directly to signal Chen Changxing to leave, but due to the inexplicable silence in the room, he inexplicably asked, "You don't know how to practice?" "I haven't practiced." Chen Changxing said a sentence that he had repeated twice in the Xinjiang mansion yesterday. The teacher looked at him expressionlessly, meaning, "Why didn't you take the initiative to leave?" Chen Changxing saluted and then left. But the direction he left was not the main entrance of Tiandao Academy, but the building. The teacher was stunned before realizing what he wanted to do. He shouted angrily, "Stop! Today we will be running outside for another day. Monday is another busy day, and Chen Changxing has also ushered in a new day. He is about to officially start his journey of learning, and the road is long and arduous. Just like this story itself, it will be written for a long time, but we have entered a new world. It is important to bravely paddle and start accelerating. This is a brand new beginning, and today is a brand new Monday. This is a brand new process of ranking, and with the most sincere attitude, we earnestly request your dear friends to cast a recommendation vote to help Zetian Ji shine even more. Thank you." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Happy Opening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Happy Opening. Chen Changxing stopped and turned to look at the teacher, feeling puzzled. Then he remembered the people he had seen before, and finally understood where the other person's anger came from. Those unsuccessful candidates all retreated after this stage. The teacher thought he should do the same, but he continued to move forward on his own, which made the other person somewhat unhappy. He didn't want to waste time on meaningless arguments and misunderstandings. He bowed seriously to the teacher who was getting up and explained directly, "Teacher, I'm not causing trouble." The teacher was about to scold him for his intentions in causing trouble in such a solemn examination room when he suddenly heard him say this sentence first. He couldn't help but pause and was choked up a bit. He coughed twice and shouted, "Then why don't you quickly retreat?" The waiting teenagers behind Chen Changxing were already feeling anxious and anxious. At this moment, when they saw him refusing to leave, they thought he was playing a prank and were very angry. They also followed the teacher and started scolding him, while others mocked him for suffering from mental illness. Chen Changxing listened to those words and laughter in his ears, but his expression remained unchanged. He didn't look like a 14-year-old boy, calm and somewhat bewildering. He looked at the teacher and bowed politely, saying in an orderly manner, "I have never practiced, but I can still apply to the Heavenly Way Academy." The teacher was stunned, not knowing what the boy was trying to say. "Since you haven't even succeeded in washing your marrow, where are you qualified to continue taking the exam? Where have there been any exceptions in recent years? Even if there is, why is it your turn?" Chen Changxing said, according to the remarks in Article 8 of Chapter 17, Chapter 4 of the Regulations of the Tiandao Academy, the admission examination paper is the only standard. 11 years ago, there was also a precedent by the Qingli department. Looking at his simple attire, the teacher instinctively prepared to scold him. It was not that he despised poverty and wealth, but that he didn't believe it at all. How could this young man, who clearly came from a remote and impoverished area, have a better understanding of the rules of the Heavenly Way Academy than himself, who had been in charge of recruiting for several years? What note item? Is this included in the hospital regulations? Why don't you have any impression of yourself? However, just as he was about to have someone take the young man away, he suddenly heard the word Qingli Si, and was surprised, retracting the words he was about to say. The Qingli department was originally an inconspicuous institution under the Ministry of Personnel of the Great Zhou dynasty. As the Empress Dowager came to power, the Qingli department, which was taken care of by the famous cruel official Zhou Tang, who was favored by her family, became different. Many loyal old officials and generals died inexplicably in those ordinary-looking buildings. Gradually, this name made all the powerful officials of the Zhou dynasty tremble with fear. Although the Heavenly Dao Court is not under the jurisdiction of the Qingli office, it is inevitable that there is some fear. What makes this teacher most uneasy is that the Qingli office, in order to wash away the bad reputation, pays the most attention to reputation among the people. When facing public justice, it emphasizes the so-called principles. If there is a rule mentioned in the Heavenly Dao Court regulations for many years, then there may be trouble. Looking at Chen Changxing's calm expression, the teacher suddenly felt a little unconfident. After hesitating for a moment, he frowned and shouted at the back of the team, but turned around and left without knowing where he had gone. The crowd's shouting and mocking gradually stopped and turned into whispers, not knowing what had happened. After a while, the teacher returned and his gaze towards Chen Changxing became somewhat complicated. Chen Changxing knew that the other party should have gone to check the regulations of the court before, and saw the note he had mentioned. He had been studying in the temple since childhood, with 3,000 volumes of the main road in his mind, countless classic books and articles going back and forth, even reading the regulations and etiquette details of various countries countless times, so naturally he would not make a mistake. Even if you continue the exam, there won't be any chance, why waste time? The teacher looked at Chen Changxing's expressionless face and said, with a very stern expression. Chen Changxing said, "Students still want to give it a try." The teacher said, "How could you solve those questions if you didn't succeed in washing your marrow? And it would hurt your mind. Are you sure you want to take the exam?" This statement is actually true. After washing the marrow and clearing the heart, the biggest difference between us and ordinary people is not only the strength of our bodies, but also the difference in the strength of our spiritual consciousness. This is a chance encounter that cannot be changed by human labor. Without washing the marrow, we will definitely not be able to solve those difficult problems, and even be severely injured. Therefore, the small table in the bamboo shed and the black sensing stone on the table have become a necessary level in the assessment. As long as the black stone cannot be made bright, it will be eliminated. This has become a convention or common sense, so there was no objection from any losers before, until the emergence of Chen Changxing as an anomaly. Chen Changxing bowed and said, "Students are sure to take the exam." The teacher's face looked a bit ugly, and he thought to himself that since you were just wasting your own time and delaying everyone's time because you didn't know where to come from by chance and saw that rule, then let's go. If your consciousness is really damaged and you become an idiot, it's also your own fault. Then you go. Chen Changxing bowed again, said no more, walked out of the bamboo shed, and walked towards the building deep in the Heavenly Way courtyard. The teacher stopped saying anything and looked at the remaining students with a frosty expression, saying, "Next." Chen Changxing was the first person in over a decade to continue taking the admission exam for Tiandaoyuan Academy despite failing the induction stone assessment. The teenagers who watched him leave from afar couldn't understand what had happened, and those who knew the truth didn't take this matter seriously. Drilling holes was ultimately just drilling holes, unable to wash the marrow. Both memory and analytical and computational abilities were just ordinary, and it was impossible to do the admission test for the Heavenly Tao Academy. Chen Changsheng's behavior was at most an interesting interlude. That building is the A-class building of the Tiandao Academy. Many people looked down upon Chen Changsheng as he walked into the building. However, the young man in green, Tang 36, who ended his assessment early and successfully entered the Tiandao Academy, took a deep look at Chen Changsheng. He also doesn't think Chen Changsheng can pass the assessment, but he appreciates the other party's serious and even stubborn spirit, because it easily reminds him of himself. At this moment, the vice dean of the Tiandao Academy appeared beside him and smiled, saying, "Do you think that young man has a chance?" "I don't think so." "Who was the last person to be admitted to the Tiandao Academy as an ordinary person?" "That person's name is Wang Jitze, and there hasn't been a person like Wang Jitze in this continent for hundreds of years." Wang Jitze was a legendary figure in this continent. In the late years of Emperor Taizu's reign, he was admitted to the Heavenly Tao Academy at the age of 16 and was an ordinary person who had never practiced. After graduating from the Heavenly Taoist Academy, he worked as an ordinary clerk in the imperial court until he was 40 years old. Suddenly, there was a long howl at night in Kyoto, and Wang Jitze became enlightened overnight and began to practice. In just a few years, he reached his peak and eventually became the deputy commander of the Human Alliance, playing a decisive role in the battle against the Demon Clan. Until today, his portrait is still hanging on the Lingyan attic. The policy of not seeing a king in the world has been around for a long time. Tang 36 said, "I don't think he can pass the assessment, nor do I think he is the next Wang Jitze. But I think that if you want to become someone as remarkable as Wang Jitze, you must at least have the same spirit of not giving up as the young man just now, and live with enough rigor. I never think that geniuses are so great. The truly most terrifying people are those who are the most ruthless towards you." The vice president shook his head and said, "When Wang Jitze was studying at the ethnic school, he ate frozen congee in freezing snow and ice, and could not get enough of it. How could the teenager learn?" Tang 36 said, "At least that young man is much stronger than the other mediocre people." The vice dean glanced at him and said, "It's indeed Tang. Judging by things and people is so unique." Tang 36 frowned slightly and said, "Please call me Tang 36. The vice dean laughed and said, "Entering my Heavenly Tao Academy, I think your name will change again." Tang 36 said solemnly, "That is an inevitable thing." The vice dean glanced at the building and felt the faint fragrance emanating from the windows. He asked, "Do you want to continue waiting?" Tang 36 said, "Yes." The vice dean asked, "Why?" Tang 36 said, "Although he cannot pass, I really want to know how many points he can get. The exam paper on the desk is extremely thick, like a small mountain." Chen Changsheng was a bit nervous because he didn't know the specific content of the exam paper. As we all know, the reason why it was extremely difficult to get into the Tiandao Academy is because the admission exam questions cover everything from the true meaning of Taoism to the initial debate of the Tian Shu, and even to the art of war, and there are often agricultural exam questions. Even in the perfect state of washing marrow, it is difficult to complete so many test questions before the incense burns out, let alone he is just an ordinary person. He sat in front of the desk, closed his eyes for 5 breaths, then opened it and reached out to open the first page of the exam paper. When doing this action, his emotions were a bit complicated. It was curiosity about the unknown and unease about where it came from, but there was still a little bit of inexplicable anticipation. His fingers suddenly froze, and a hint of doubt flashed in his bright mirror-like eyes. It is said that the exam questions in Tiandao Academy are very difficult. If you are studying the essence of the scriptures, you often search for the most obscure chapters in the most remote places. But why? Does the first question on the first page seem so familiar to you? Tsinkanzi and the Seventh Pope's debate on the true meaning of the 31 canons. When did you see it yourself? It seems like when he was 3 years old. That was an inconspicuous section in the annotations of the South China Classic and Huainan, but he confirmed that he had read and memorized it before, and had seen and memorized it again at the age of 5 and 11. Not only do he have familiar eyes, but he is already familiar with these things in his heart. Chen Changsheng was a bit puzzled, but after all, he was still a teenager and more of a surprise. He didn't think much anymore, picked up his ink brush, and began to copy the fragments of chapters in his mind, the insightful insights that his predecessors could express about it, onto paper. Then he opened the second page and, without any surprise, saw familiar chapters. The Tao encompasses everything, and the admission exam questions for Tiandao Hospital are almost all in 3,000 volumes. He can recite all those 3,000 volumes backwards. How can such an exam be difficult to defeat him? As soon as the book was opened, the recommended vote climbed to the top of the list, which was not easy. I sincerely thank everyone, holding their hands and shaking non-stop. Please continue to vote, thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Meeting of Chen and Tang. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 8. Meeting of Chen and Tang. When the incense burned out, a golden sound sounded, indicating the end of this round of student exams. Chen Changsheng walked out of the building with the other students waiting to take the exam, ignoring the strange gazes at him. He followed the instructions and went to the place where the exam was held in Shiping, Huho, waiting for the final exam results in the evening. Most of the other people still stayed in front of the building, comparing their answers or complaining about the difficulty of the exam. When he arrived at the lake, the stone flat was still quiet, with only the young man in blue who had previously shone brightly standing by the lake. He thought that genius would inevitably feel lonely and didn't step forward, but he didn't expect the other person to come over. My name is Tang 36, said the young man in green. Chen Changsheng was somewhat surprised and didn't expect the other party to come forward for a conversation, tidy up their clothes, and politely respond, "Dear Chen, Chen Changsheng." Tang 36 was stunned for a moment, as if he had never expected the name of this young man to be so vulgar. Even a wealthy man from the countryside would probably not have named his son like this. After a moment of silence, he said, "This name is quite simple, I can't say it's wrong." Chen Changsheng thought to himself that you speak honestly, but your name is also quite strange. My name is Chen Changsheng. It's because I had a disease when I was young. Shifu hopes I can live a long life. What about you? Why are you called Tang 36? Are you ranked 36 in your family? Why are there so many people in your family? Where is your family? Are there so many brothers and sisters? Will it be too noisy when you endorse? Tang 36 was stunned. It is not very polite to ask the other person's name in person, especially since he has a cold and approachable face. Those who do not know his name's origin, even if they are curious, endure it in front of him and dare not ask in person. However, they did not expect that this young man would casually ask and also include so many topics. In fact, Chen Changsheng's idea is very simple. In Kyoto, where he is not familiar with life, in the Tiandao Academy full of ridicule and cold eyes, if the other party is clearly a genius but actively comes to get close to him, then he should naturally give back more enthusiasm and kindness, at least take the initiative to chat and chat. He has been living with his master and senior brother since childhood. His master rarely speaks and his senior brother doesn't speak at all, so he doesn't know how to conduct greetings, appearing a bit awkward and stiff. Although he wants to convey good intentions to the other party, it is easy to misunderstand, just like yesterday in the Divine General's mansion. However, it is interesting that Tang 36 not only did not dislike it, but also felt that Chen Changsheng was very honest and sincere. What Tang 36 wanted to do most in his life was to be a real person. In the world, he encountered nothing but mediocre people and nothing but vain people. Suddenly, he met someone like Chen Changsheng and was very satisfied. There are indeed many peers in my clan, and their endorsements are all in their respective families, so I don't argue. The reason why I am called Tang 36 is not because I rank 36th in my family, but because I first made it to the Qingyun list when I was 15 years old last year, ranking 36th. I feel very embarrassed, especially compared to that woman and that wolf cub. So I changed my name to Tang 36 to remind myself of how terrible my current level of strength is. It seems like I have answered all the questions. Yes, I have answered all the questions. The above conversation is Chen Changxing's first communication after leaving Xining and arriving in the bustling capital, and it is also Tang 36's first communication after leaving Wenshui and arriving in the capital. At that time, Chen Changxing was 14 years old, and Tang 36 was about to turn 16. They were both somewhat ignorant and inexperienced in this regard. This communication was undoubtedly awkward, interesting, and ridiculous. However, many years of history later proved that this communication was extremely successful, and it can even be said that it was the most successful and important communication since the alliance between Emperor Taizong and the leader of the demon clan. How many questions did you answer? Tang 36 asked. He is indeed interested in this answer because he always feels that although Chen Changxing is an ordinary person, he should not be an ordinary person. When he saw that Chen Changxing's face was a bit pale, he realized that his question was not appropriate. Even as a genius like him, he found it difficult. It was obvious that Chen Changxing's mental exhaustion was too severe, and depending on the situation, the result should not be too good. There are some questions about cultivation that cannot be answered, such as divine consciousness, true energy, and the burning of stars and the sun. Chen Changxing spoke honestly, feeling a bit lucky in his heart. He had been studying Taoist scriptures since childhood, and those seemingly difficult academic questions were not difficult for him. Instead, they were questions related to cultivation, and he really had no answer. Fortunately, it was only an admission exam, and there wasn't much content in that area. As Tang 36 listened, he realized something was wrong. The only questions he couldn't answer were these. Did this little guy actually answer all the other questions? At that moment, he noticed on the other side of the lake, a teacher holding a thick test paper, walking quickly towards a certain place. The teacher seemed to be in a restless mood and almost fell when climbing the stone steps. He couldn't help but be slightly stunned, thinking of Chen Changxing's previous words, and couldn't help but wonder if this little guy really wanted to shock everyone. Are you sure you've answered the rest? I can't say for sure. There are two versions of the Tai Shang Qing Xian mantra. In the year when the national education was first established, there was a compilation and revision. Later, everyone used the revised version all the time, but the title mentioned the era before 1573, so I didn't know which version to use to answer. In the end, I had to answer both versions, fearing that it would displease the teacher and result in a deduction of points. Tang 36 couldn't help but remain silent upon hearing these words. He only knows one version of that question and has only answered one version. After a while, he looked at Chen Changxing and said, I always thought that Guy and I were the most arrogant characters in the younger generation. I didn't expect you to be even more arrogant than us. Chen Changxing was puzzled and thought to himself, where have you been so arrogant? The list has been posted. There is no name for Chen Changxing on it. Chen Changxing stood at the bottom of the list and remained silent for a long time. The crowd looked at him with a somewhat unfriendly expression, mocking and contemptuous. If it weren't for Tang 36 standing shoulder to shoulder with him, there would probably have been many unpleasant words by now. I don't understand, Chen Changxing said. Tang 36 doesn't understand either. He believed that this young man who made him feel warm and sincere would not lie. Since he said he had answered most of the questions, he should have answered them. According to the score, even if he didn't rank at the top, at least he should be more than enough to make it to the list. Chen Changxing found the teacher who was originally responsible for the assessment of induction stones and said, I need to check the papers. The teacher sorted out the miscellaneous matters and didn't look directly at his calm and persistent gaze. He said, since you have obtained the qualification for the exam through rules and regulations, you should know. My exam papers from Tiandaoyuan Academy have never been allowed to be rechecked, which represents respect for Tiandao Academy. If you don't pass the exam, you won't pass it. Chen Chongqing watched as he remained silent for a long time, then turned around and left. Although he didn't say anything, I knew what he was trying to say. Such a little guy who is angry and doesn't speak ill is really amazing. Tang 36 looked at the young man's figure disappearing on the other side of the lake, turned around and looked at someone mocking him, saying, "It's really remarkable that even the Heavenly Tao Academy dares not accept talents like him. You're only 2 years older than him, calling him a little guy is really interesting." "What's even more interesting is, how do you know what he's trying to say?" said the Vice Dean of the Tiandao Academy. "He wants to say, you will definitely regret it." "The reason I know this is because if I were treated like him, I would definitely say that." "Will Tiandao Academy regret rejecting an ordinary student?" "He is not an ordinary student, he is a genius like me." After a moment of silence, the Vice Dean of the Heavenly Way Academy said, "I have read the young man's exam paper and without any marrow washing, he could have gained a wide understanding and knowledge. He can indeed be said to be a genius, even compared to Wang Jitsa back then. If it were normal, I would definitely admit him to the hospital and personally teach him, but unfortunately, this time it won't work." Tang 36 looked at him and asked, "Why not?" "Because someone said hello," said the Vice Dean. "Who?" "Xinjiang Mansion. In today's mainland, with a single husband, 5 saints, and countless perverts on the carefree list, not to mention those demons who hide in the wilderness, the 30.8 divine generals are certainly powerful. But where is the Heavenly Tao Academy? Who would listen to the commands of the divine general's mansion? Your father entrusted you to my care, so I won't hide this matter from you, but you can't speak out anymore. This is just the divine general's mansion, so it naturally won't affect my Heavenly Tao Academy. But that divine general's mansion is different because it is the Eastern Imperial Divine General's mansion, and the owner of the mansion is named Su Shiji. Su Shiji. Even if favored by the Holy Empress and powerful, he is ultimately just a divine general. But his family has a phoenix." The coldness and pride between Tang 36's eyebrows were hard to maintain when he heard the word phoenix. It melted instantly and remained silent for a long time. He murmured, "Chen Chongqing, that guy, actually provoked that phoenix. Who the hell is he?" The Vice Dean calmly said, "Don't worry about who it is. He is already 14 years old, and even if he becomes enlightened, it is already too late. There are too many geniuses in the world, and even if he has more potential, what can he do? Compared with Wang Jitsa earlier, if he really has Wang Jitsa's perseverance and luck, what does it matter whether he is in the Heavenly Tao Academy or not?" Chen Chongqing was unaware that his failure was related to the Su family. He thought he probably had a spot for the children of a powerful family in Kyoto, so he was manipulated. Although he had just entered the mortal world, he had already seen too many deceitful and obscene things in Taoist Tibetan opera texts, and could only remain silent. What else can he do now besides being silent? He left Tiandao Academy and walked towards the second academy on the list, but still did not notice that the carriage with the blood phoenix emblem was following him from a distance. There were countless errors in the quotation marks in yesterday's chapter. This is really. The main problem is that I really like to use Microsoft Yahoo, especially after using Xiaohiwu, which feels very beautiful. As a result, there is no difference in the quotation marks before and after that font, so the mistake is so terrible that I can't bear to see it. I have reluctantly given up on this font and apologize to everyone. 5555. Also, Wang Su. This name cannot be displayed due to some reasons that I don't quite understand, so it has been changed to Wang Jisu. The previous chapter has been modified, please read it again. Today, I saw many readers on Tencent, and we talked happily. I dare not say anything about it, anyway, my voice is dry. Dumb also held back for a long time. Tomorrow morning is a plane again. Stay up for another 2 days, let's play fiercely, end of this chapter. Chapter 9. Star Picking. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 9 Star Picking. In today's world, cultivation is mainly based on the orthodox teachings of the state religion, and the main source of true essence is the abundance of stars in the sky. The light cult emphasizes the word light, which illuminates the night sky with starlight. Breaking through the seat and shining into the deep and secluded world, then gathering stars to transform the body and spirit of ordinary people through the scattered energy of countless stars. This is the ultimate goal of cultivation, and one can imagine the position of the word star in the cultivation world. Various countries and sects have stargazing platforms and numerous famous stargazing towers in Tiandaoyuan, but it is rare to see names such as collecting stars and seizing them, as it may appear disrespectful to the stars. But the second college on Chen Changsheng's list is undoubtedly called the Star Picking College. Picking stars. This college has taken such a domineering name, but the national education has no objections. This matter itself is very domineering. Only this college in the world dares to use and is qualified to use this name. Because this college is directly affiliated with the Zhou military, it has cultivated countless brave and resolute young people over the years, and has produced numerous generals like stars. Many years ago, in the shocking war with the Demon Clan, humanity was on the brink of extinction in its early stages. From the dean to ordinary students, the Star Picking Academy rushed to the battlefield, one after another, and 9 out of 10 died on the battlefield. After the war, the vast academy withered and fell silent like a tomb. With this, the Star Picking Academy has gained unparalleled respect and an unimaginable momentum in the human world. Who dares to propose an opinion on such a college, not to mention picking stars, even if they want to use burning stars as their name? Everyone in the world is well aware of the bloody, cruel, and glorious history of the Star Picking Academy, and Chen Changsheng is no exception. Master listed the Star Picking Academy as the second on his list, but in his mind, the Star Picking Academy was actually ranked first. Therefore, although not being able to enter the Heavenly Tao Academy made him feel a bit frustrated, he didn't pay too much attention. He believes that the Star Picking Academy will not be as selfish as the Heavenly Tao Academy, at least not as excessive. With this thought in mind, he arrived at the breathtaking Star Picking Academy and began preparing for the second exam. The Star Picking Academy is indeed different from the Heavenly Tao Academy. Although there is also a dark crowd outside the gate, it is unclear whether it is due to the eagle-like gaze of those fully armed elite soldiers at the gate, or the stone tablet filled with the names of martyr generals at the gate of the academy, which is too oppressive. The scene is quiet and there is no noise. Fill out a simple registration form, collect license plates, and under the guidance of several officers, more than 600 young people waiting for the test walked into the courtyard door. Similar to the assessment of the Heavenly Tao Academy, the Star Picking Academy has also prepared an early exam with the aim of eliminating ordinary teenagers who failed to wash their marrow in advance, in order to reduce the pressure on the subsequent formal enrollment exam. However, the Star Picking Academy has a military nature, and its methods are much simpler and more direct than those of the Heavenly Tao Academy. There are no induction stones here, only a stone plate. That stone plate was very large, very similar to a grinding plate. In fact, it was originally a temporary grinding plate unloaded from the stone mill outside the kitchen of the Star Picking Academy, weighing 300 pounds. Candidates who can lift this millstone and walk up the 30-level stone steps are eligible to participate in the formal enrollment exam even if they pass the first-level assessment. A weight of 300 pounds, unless the marrow is successfully washed and the muscles and bones are exercised like a pine, it is difficult for ordinary people to lift it, let alone walk such a long stone step. Many young people who were unable to wash their marrow successfully looked at the grinding wheel, their faces suddenly changed color, and many of them retreated dejectedly. Even some young people who had already washed their marrow successfully but at unstable states judged that they could not do it this year, shook their heads repeatedly, unwilling but reluctantly giving up. Of course, there are also some ordinary teenagers who bravely try to challenge themselves with their original strength, but none of them succeed. Unable to wash his marrow, he lifted this grinding disc. In the enrollment examination of the Star Picking Academy, it is not uncommon. For example, the White Tiger Divine General who is currently guarding Jialan Pass was unable to wash his marrow when he first entered the academy, but with his innate divine power, he easily threw the grinding disc directly to the other side of the lake. But ultimately, this is not a very common thing. The instructor felt a bit regretful and decided to accelerate the pace after looking at the sky, allowing the candidates to declare their own level. Then, the successful candidates who had undergone marrow washing would take the exam first, and ordinary teenagers would try it out. Unfortunately, until midday, no ordinary boy has created a miracle. Just as people found it boring and many onlookers were about to leave, a burly young man walked into the arena with a license plate and effortlessly lifted the millstone, pedaling and pedaling, even climbing 30 stone steps. He was breathless, his face not red, and even carried the millstone back to its original place. There was an uproar in the room. The young man raised his hand and gestured around, arrogantly walking up the stone steps again towards the depths of the academy. It is interesting that he was born too simple and honest. No matter how much he tried to deliberately show pride, in the eyes of the onlookers, he was only cute, without any mockery, only a friendly laugh. After the burly young man left, many people began to speculate about his origin, until someone suddenly mentioned the faint blue pattern on his ankle, which shocked everyone. Because it means that the young man is highly likely to have demon lineage, or even come from the Western demon realm. For hundreds of years, the relationship between the human race and the demon race, although not harmonious, can still be considered peaceful due to their past joint resistance against the demon race. Some demonic aristocrats who can transform even live in the human world, and there must be some in the capital of Great Zhou. However, after all, humans and demons have different paths, and the human world, whether official or civilian, does not mention this matter much. As long as those demonic tribes do not act recklessly, it is good. The burly young man suspected of being a demon tribe successfully lifted the millstone, as if pushing open a door. Then, two more hunter youths from Dalaling, relying solely on their own original strength, lifted the millstone and walked up the stone steps. Although it seemed very difficult, they still won waves of applause. The officer holding a pen above the stone steps doing statistics nodded slightly, looking very satisfied with this year's results. Time flies, finally it's Chen Changxing's turn. The onlookers looked at the young man with a childish face and kindly helped out a few words of prestige, but no longer paid much attention. Because this young man is obviously still young and not fully developed, not to mention being as burly as the demon tribe boy, even the two hunter boys are far less robust, and it is impossible to lift such a heavy grinding wheel no matter how they look. At Tiandao Academy, Chen Changxing relied on his familiarity with the rules and regulations of the academy to directly skip the stage of selecting the essence. At this time, at the Star Picking Academy, he may have thought of other methods, but he doesn't know if he was influenced by the intense atmosphere of the academy's purge, or if he just wanted to give it a try. He didn't do anything. He walked up to the millstone and slowly squatted down, holding both sides of the millstone with both hands steadily. He took 5 slow and deep breaths and exhaled, pouring all his strength into his waist, abdomen, and arms. He snorted and suddenly exerted force. The front of the inclined stone steps suddenly became quiet, and those who were chatting forgot to answer in shock. They opened their mouths and looked into the room. The grinding wheel slowly rose and was finally lifted to the chest by Chen Changxing, no more, no less, just 1 inch above the assessment standard. His face turned slightly red, but his expression was relatively calm, and there was no sign of panic or nervousness in his eyes. Boom! There were enthusiastic cheers in the room, and people kept cheering for the young man with rhythmic cheers, wanting to help him lift his feet. Chen Changxing took a step forward, but just one step made his knees tremble slightly. Lifting the grinding wheel up is one thing, carrying such a heavy grinding wheel up the stone steps is another thing. His breath became a bit chaotic, and his face became increasingly red. He didn't make any sound, and from the slightly bulging cheeks, he could see that he was biting his teeth hard. He walked step by step up the stone steps. Chen Changsheng did not succeed in washing his marrow. His muscles were only as strong as those of an ordinary teenager, and due to his illness since childhood, he should be even weaker than an ordinary teenager. But it is precisely because of illness that it is difficult to cure, so the three people in the dilapidated temple outside Xining town, including himself, care most about his health. As soon as he became sensible, he was forced to recite the 3,000 Taoist treasures in the broken temple. At the same time, the Taoist master who had some divine teachings dug countless herbs and boiled them into medicinal soup for him to soak in, while the other senior brothers continued to help him beat his body with thorns and wooden sticks. For over a decade, he has been most familiar with the three people in the temple. His most familiar smells are the smell of books, medicine, and sticks. After a long period of treatment and suffering, his illness was not cured, and he could not become as talented and divine as a demon tribe youth. However, he, who should have been extremely weak, is now no longer weaker than ordinary people in terms of physical health, and even better. Although this is only superficial health and strength, it also makes him very happy. A young man who fell ill from a young age and was shrouded in a dark shadow at the age of 10 will be more concerned about physical matters than others, and will be extremely concerned about those details. Therefore, today at the Star Picking Academy, he silently walked to the grinding wheel, hoping to pass this exam with his own strength. He wanted to lift the heavy millstone, prove something to himself, and express gratitude to his master and senior brother. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps. Chen Changsheng's breathing became heavier and his face became increasingly ugly. His tightly tied black hair had already been soaked with sweat, but his eyes remained calm and certain. The cheers and cheers on both sides of the stone steps have stopped. Everyone looked at the young man with his head down and struggling to walk on the stone steps, trembling and trembling. They were both worried and admired. Several times, the young man was about to fall, but the strength from somewhere surprisingly supported him to persevere. The instructor looked at Chen Changsheng on the stone steps with an appreciative expression in his eyes. 7 steps, 8 steps, 9 steps. Chen Changsheng's footsteps are slowing down. The appreciation in the eyes of the instructor grew stronger and stronger. He was surprised by the level displayed by this young man. As a soldier, what he cared about was the perseverance and courage displayed by Chen Changsheng. He had decided that even if Chen Changsheng could not lift the millstone onto the stone steps, he would still pass this initial test. As for whether this will affect the reputation of the college and the military of Dazhou, the instructor looked at the tense people, feeling slightly relieved, and thought to himself that he probably wouldn't. It seemed that the vast majority of people thought the same way as himself. A serious and hardworking child deserves special praise. Thinking about these things, the instructor was a bit distracted and didn't keep looking at the stone steps until a moment when he woke up and suddenly noticed a change in the expression on people's faces. He turned his head and saw an additional person by his side. That is a boy who is completely soaked and exhausted. The instructor thought to himself that there was no need to make things difficult, so he smiled and reached out to pat his shoulder. Chen Changsheng walked above the stone steps. The heavy grinding wheel was at his feet. He succeeded. The chapter name, Picking Stars, is the name of the college. As it will be a very important college in the future, it is specially pointed out. Moreover, stars are very important in the world of Tianjiji. Here, we recommend listening to an old song by Zheng Xiaoqiu. Picking Stars. Long and long journey, cold and dreamy, quiet in the snow. The boy in the rugged terrain looks up. I often sing in KTV, I am the legendary Maibao. This song is used as the theme song for Chen Changsheng. It's simply, end of this chapter. Did I do anything wrong in chapter 10? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Did I do anything wrong in chapter 10? Chen Changsheng successfully entered the official enrollment examination of the Star Picking College. This time, unlike the teasing or indifference that greeted him in the Heavenly Way Academy, there were earnest expectations and gentle encouragement in his eyes, which made him feel warm, determined, and in a good state. The enrollment of various colleges in Kyoto has different focuses, while the Tendo Academy focuses on the teachings of the Chinese religion and the talents of cultivation, while the Saisei Academy does not pay too much attention to cultivation. The military of Dezhou always thought that cultivation was something to pay attention to only after admission. They were more concerned about the military literacy and discipline of those candidates, so the number of exam questions in the Star-Picking Academy was not as many as in the Heavenly Tao Academy. However, they had extremely strict requirements for format and even the method of writing names, and the content of the exam questions was mainly focused on battlefield simulation and analysis of combat cases. If there is any talent in Chen Changsheng, his greatest talent is the millions of books he has memorized since childhood. Just like the Tiandaoyuan Academy exam, when he opens the exam paper, the first question he sees is very familiar. The 3,000 avenues cover everything, and this statement is not at all false. There are no mathematical gates like stars and sand in the world, including famous military records and historical war examples. The description of the war between humans and demons is extremely detailed. He remembers those, so naturally he won't answer wrong. Very smoothly, Chen Changsheng finished his exam and went to the military discipline building with his other companions, waiting for the final list to be announced. Standing in front of the divine beast representing the strict military discipline of the Zhou army, he recalled the content of the exam paper and confirmed that he should have no problem getting into the Star-Picking Academy. He relaxed a bit and looked at the young demon race boy with a bitter face. He kindly patted the other's shoulder to comfort him. It was obvious that this gifted demon race boy did not know much about human military tactics and did not perform well in the exam. The setting sun was about to set, and the slightly red light shone on the cold iron fence of the divine beast and the military discipline building, creating a mysterious and eerie feeling in the environment. Chen Changsheng stood in the light and shadow, looking at the still empty stone wall, his innocent face full of happy smiles and expectations for the future. However, he did not know that later on he would still face bitter disappointment. Why? The Dezhou officer who previously presided over the initial examination of the grinding wheel and another instructor with a solemn expression stood in front of the desk, looking at a middle-aged general questioning behind the desk. His face was unusually blue, and it was obvious that he was about to suppress his anger. The middle-aged general had an expressionless expression, eyebrows like silkworms, not angry but majestic. Listening to the angry questioning of his subordinates, he frowned slightly and said, "Are you questioning your superiors?" Two instructors were stunned by the words, and one of them pointed to the sunset outside the building and said, "Although there were only the two of us who saw the test paper, there were still many colleagues who paid attention to the candidate named Chen Changsheng. My attitude may not be good, but if my colleagues knew the outcome, they would also raise the same question." The middle-aged general said, "After all, he is just an ordinary young man who has failed to wash his marrow. Why do you value him so much?" The instructor angrily took a step forward and pointed to the test paper that had already been crumpled into waste paper behind the case, saying, "You have also looked at that test paper. You should be very clear that in the past decade or so, there has never been such a perfect test paper in the admission examination. Whether it is the standard answer sheet or the analysis of the case, there are no loopholes, no typos, or even slightly thicker strokes. Yes, that child may not be able to become a brave and powerful divine general like you, but he can definitely become the best staff officer." After a moment of silence, the middle-aged general said, "This is an order from the palace, I don't need to explain it to you." The instructor was taken aback by the words and only woke up after a while. His voice was slightly heavy and he said, "But I need to give that child an explanation." The middle-aged general lifted his head, glanced at him, and said, "Then let him come over and I'll explain it to him." Entering the towering tower and watching the burning candlelight on the table, Chen Changsheng remained silent. His fists hanging by his body gradually clenched, and his face turned pale. It was unclear whether he was tired or angry, or both. When he saw that his name was still missing from the stone wall, he was really angry, much more so than when he encountered cold looks and contempt in the Divine General's mansion yesterday. Because he had great expectations for entering the Star-Picking Academy, and all the expectations turned into disappointment at the moment he saw the list. The efforts he put in for it now seem like a joke. What exactly is all this because of? He needs an explanation. The middle-aged general after the case said he wanted to give him an explanation and he wanted to know what it would be. Sorry. The middle-aged general stood up and stared at him coldly like a beast staring at a little white rabbit, but the words he said were sorry. As a soldier of the Zhou dynasty, I apologize for violating my principles of conduct. I'm sorry that my actions may damage the reputation of the Star-Picking Academy. You have talent and a future. You are just a child, but I have to temporarily suspend your future. I'm sorry. I can't tell you why, sorry. But I think you will soon know the reason, so I hope you can give me a chance to correct my mistake. After hearing these words, Chen Changxing fell silent for a moment, then turned around and left. At 5 a.m. the next day, Chen Changxing woke up on time as he had every day in the past 14 years, washed and dressed, pondered and clarified his mind, and then left the inn to continue his journey of learning. He went to 2 other colleges in the order listed. The experiences at the Heavenly Tao Academy and the Star-Picking Academy naturally made him unhappy, but he was the person who cherished time the most in the world. He didn't want to waste his time in meaningless anger and regret, only willing to use it in valuable places. This kind of performance sometimes gives people the feeling of being indomitable. Yesterday's experience did not seem to have had any impact on him. He prepared carefully, took the exam carefully, and with the knowledge reserves and resilient will in his mind, successfully passed the admission exams for these 2 colleges. Based on the content of the exam papers, he believed he should be able to pass successfully. And then did not fall behind unexpectedly. With the first 2 experiences, Chen Changxing is no longer so disappointed, or rather he has become numb. He is very clear that someone must be targeting him secretly, and as for who? That answer is also very clear. In the evening, he walked out of the 4th Academy and finally saw the carriage of the Divine General's mansion for the first time. He saw the heart-wrenching and clear-blood phoenix emblem on the carriage shaft, which was somewhat old and clear. Of course, that was because the other party specifically parked the carriage in front of the courtyard door, just for him to see. Chen Changxing looked at the carriage and knew that the answer was about to be revealed. Although he had guessed the answer, his feeling when he saw the exam paper was still somewhat different. The middle-aged woman walked down from the carriage. You are just a child. You have no right to let the Divine General's mansion do so much. The middle-aged woman walked up to him and said expressionlessly, but we still did so much because we were worried that you might not have a clear understanding of the situation because you were too young, so we showed our strength very seriously to show you. You should be very clear now that as long as we don't agree, you will never have a bright future in the Zhou dynasty. Chen Changxing remembers her. The first person he saw in the Divine General's mansion was her. He saluted her, then stood up straight without speaking. A strange color flashed in the eyes of the middle-aged woman. She didn't expect that even in such a situation, the young man could remain so calm and didn't even forget to bow to himself. This behavior was somewhat bewildering and even unsettling, but she had to finish it. You are very clear about what we want. If you agree, everything we deprive you of can be returned to your side, including the Heavenly Tao Academy, Star-Picking Academy, and Ancestral Sacrifice Academy. Whatever you choose, whatever you want to learn, you can choose, whoever you want to follow, you can choose, after completing your studies, whether you want to join the army, the national church, or become an official. Everything is up to your choice. The middle-aged woman looked at him with a serious expression and said, and if you don't agree, the experiences of the past 2 days will be a recurring image of your life. Chen Changxing remained silent and did not speak. The middle-aged woman said, "You are a smart person and should be very clear on how to choose." Chen Changsheng looked at her and finally said the first sentence. As mentioned in my senior brother's notes, smart people can't live happily, so it's difficult to be confused in life. The middle-aged woman smiled and said, "But you are indeed very well behaved and smart. You didn't tell anyone about your engagement. Otherwise you would be a dead person now." Chen Changsheng has finally confirmed that in the past 2 days, the Dongyu Divine General's mansion has been sending people to follow him. The middle-aged woman said, "Of course, don't misunderstand. I was just talking about a possibility earlier. The Holy Empress is in charge, and the Divine General's mansion has always been law-abiding and never bullies anyone. We are only willing to help people, but we need you to give something. What you were originally prepared to give, we can help you gain a lot. What was originally intended to be given is naturally the marriage letter. Helping you gain a lot, but those are things that you can already obtain." Chen Changsheng suddenly felt that compared to the bustling Kyoto, the mountains and forests behind the old temple, filled with fierce beasts, were so beautiful. He looked at the middle-aged woman and suddenly said, "Grandma, did I do anything wrong?" The middle-aged woman was stunned and momentarily lost in words. She has lived in Kyoto for over 100 years, watching her young lady marry into the Su mansion, watching her uncle strive for a better future, getting used to high-ranking officials in the court and powerful outsiders, and getting used to deceiving and scheming. However, she never imagined that she would hear such words, such seemingly childish but extremely difficult to answer. So she couldn't answer. My mood is not very good, which is related to the content of the chapter, but more importantly, it is because of other things. The Chronicle of Choosing Heaven is very popular among everyone. Thank you for collecting, reading, recommending, and giving tips. I am very happy about this. However, something happened today, which is very similar to a few years ago, making it difficult for me to be happy. There is really no way. Can Chen Changsheng ask that question? Who should I ask? In this world, many people no longer care about right or wrong, but fortunately, there is also the world and books that we can share with everyone. Today is the first day of the college entrance examination. I hope all students have a smooth journey in their future lives. If you can maintain it, try to talk about right and wrong for as many years as possible, because once you start not talking about right and wrong, the world may be relatively smooth for you, but in fact, it will also become very uninteresting. You may gain a lot of benefits, glory, or pleasure, but you will also lose a lot. At least, you will lose the sense of righteousness that Chen Changsheng had when he asked this question. I have always felt that this feeling would be very satisfying. I wish everyone a healthy and upright life. Thank you all. End of this chapter.